Hey there, tonight we're diving into the Tudor court, where the truth is, you'd need more than a taste for intrigue and velvet to survive a single day. Brace yourself for a world where a misstep near Henry VIII could mean losing more than favour. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. You're jolted awake by the not-so-gentle prodding of a lumpy straw mattress beneath you. Welcome to the Tudor court of Henry VIII, where your morning begins not with the smell of freshly brewed coffee, but with the pungent aroma of, well, everything. Let's just say the air is less spring meadow and more medieval funk. You thought your biggest worry today was remembering which fork to use, but it turns out just breathing here is its own kind of adventure. Picture this, it's the 16th century, and your room isn't exactly what you'd call spacious. More like a broom cupboard with ambition. The drafts are your constant companions, sneaking through the ill-fitting windows and reminding you that central heating is a luxury yet to be dreamed up. And that straw mattress, it's got more lumps than Henry's waistline after a particularly indulgent feast. So no king-sized memory foam here, just straw, ticks, and the occasional mouse if you're lucky. Now, about hygiene. It's not that Tudors were completely unfamiliar with the concept of cleanliness. It's just that their version of it might make your modern self clutch your hand sanitizer like a talisman. Bathing was a rare event, partly because heating the water was a colossal hassle, and partly because everyone believed that too much bathing could actually make you sick. You might splash your face with some cold water if you're feeling fancy, but that's about the extent of your morning routine. Toothpaste, you'd be lucky if you have a twig to gnaw on for a makeshift toothbrush while scraping your teeth with a rag dipped in salt. Let's just say dental hygiene wasn't exactly the crown jewel of Tudor priorities. And now for breakfast, the most important meal of the day. Or in Tudor terms, more beverage than meal. You start with a hearty mug of small beer. That's right, beer for breakfast. Given that water was often a one-way ticket to Dysentery City, small beer, which had an alcohol content lower than modern beer, was the go-to drink. It's the Tudor version of a morning coffee, without the caffeine, but with just enough alcohol to take the edge off your morning grumpiness. Let's debunk the myth right here. The Tudor morning isn't the glamorous, lit-by-candlelight affair some films might have you believe. It's more layers of wool and linen than silk and satin. You're donning an outfit that's part armor, part blanket, and all about piling on those layers to keep the cold at bay. Forget about expressing individual style. You're more concerned with not freezing your petticoats off. Fashion here is a practical affair, if by practical we mean anything but practical with its myriad laces, ties, and pins. While we're on the subject of odours, brace yourself, because the Tudor court is a symphony of scents, and not the pleasant kind. The lack of modern plumbing means chamber pots are the norm, emptied out windows onto unsuspecting passers-by below. The streets, in turn, become a pungent mix of mud, waste, and whatever else finds its way there. It's a miracle anyone can smell anything other than the overpowering stench of life in the 1500s. In short, this morning routine makes your usual rush hour look like a spa retreat. You've brushed aside, literally, the romanticized vision of Tudor life to reveal a morning that's less breezy idyll and more survival of the fittest. And as you prepare to navigate the day, remember, if you can survive this, you can survive anything. Welcome to the court. It's going to be quite the day. But enough about your morning routine, complete with its medieval charm, or lack thereof. It's time to step into the real arena, the Tudor court. Here every word, every glance is a potential minefield. Your morning porridge may seem innocuous, but it's served with a side of intrigue and a garnish of danger. Forget the spoon, you might need a sword. Let's talk about flattery, the Tudor court's unofficial currency. If you think compliments are just for buttering up your boss, think again. Here, they could be the thin line between keeping your head and losing it, literally. Henry VIII wasn't just any king. He was a man with an ego the size of his waistline, and that's saying something. This is a guy who broke with the Pope because the Dude wouldn't grant him a divorce. Imagine the kind of verbal gymnastics required to keep him happy. Flatter him well, and you might find yourself showered with favour. Falter, and you might find the Tower of London has a new tenant. Ah, the Tower, a place as charming as it sounds. Think of it as a Tudor version of a time-out corner, only with more chains and less chance of getting out. Misplacing a bow or forgetting the right title could fast-track you to a room with a view, minus the happy ending. The court's hierarchy was as intricate as the lace on a noblewoman's dress, and just as easy to trip over. You had dukes and duchesses, earls and countesses, all jostling for position like it's the 16th century version of musical chairs. Only here, when the music stopped, you didn't just lose a seat, you could lose your life. Now, wielding power was something of an art form. It wasn't just about who you knew, but how well you could maneuver through the court's labyrinthine politics. Imagine being in a perpetual game of chess, where everyone's a pawn, but some pawns wield daggers and have secret alliances. Courtiers were like rapier-wielding dancers, moving with precision and grace, but always just a misstep away from a deadly fall. The stakes were high, and the rewards, a title, a piece of land, perhaps even the king's ear, were higher. But it wasn't just about impressing Henry. His court was a swirling mass of rivals and sycophants, each with their agendas and ambitions. Let's not forget the royal temper, which was as unpredictable as British weather. One moment, Henry could be the picture of charm, the next, a tempestuous tyrant. Displease him, and your sunny day could quickly turn into a stormy nightmare. This was a guy who executed 2 of his 6 wives. So, yeah, he didn't exactly shy away from drastic measures when in a bad mood. Negotiating his moods was like traversing a minefield blindfolded, with only your wits and that silver tongue to guide you. And speaking of silver tongues, it wasn't just what you said, but how you said it. The art of rhetoric was alive and well in Tudor England. A well-turned phrase could win you allies, just as a poorly chosen word could make you enemies. This was a place where the wrong compliment delivered to the wrong person could see you out of favour faster than you could say, "Off with his head." The Tudor court was a theatre of power, where every player had their role, and the script was always subject to change. So, as you sip that small beer, ponder this. Surviving in the Tudor court wasn't just about physical hardiness. It was a mental marathon. Every day was a test of your cunning, your charm, and your ability to keep your head, figuratively and literally. It's a high-stakes game where the prize could be power, prestige, or, at the very least, the privilege of keeping your neck unscathed. Welcome to the Tudor court, where the drama is as thick as the porridge and twice as dangerous. But before you can truly appreciate the high-stakes game of courtly politics, it's time to dive into the culinary theatre of the Tudor banquet, a spectacle that's equal parts feast and power play. Forget your modern food fads and diet trends, because here, each dish is less about satisfying hunger and more about broadcasting influence. First, let's set the scene. The Great Hall, where dining isn't just an activity, but an event. Imagine a vast room, dimly lit by flickering torches and candles, their smoky haze mingling with the scent of roasted meats and fresh bread. Long tables groan under the weight of extravagant platters, each more opulent than the last. The tapestries on the walls might depict hunting scenes or biblical tales, but the real stories unfold at these tables, where alliances are forged over goblets of wine, and enemies are silently made between bites of venison. Let's start with the menu. You might think that the Tudors, with their reputation for opulence, would dine on exotic fruits and decadent sweets. But in reality, the fare was decidedly meat-heavy. Picture this. Roasted swan, peacock pie, and a whole boar's head staring back at you. These dishes weren't just about taste, they were status symbols. Only the wealthiest could afford such luxuries, and by wealthiest, I mean the king and his inner circle. If you're lucky enough to sit at the high table, you might get a taste, but if you're further down the pecking order, well, let's just say you'll be perfecting the art of savoring thin soup while looking grateful. Now, about those costs. A single banquet could set the royal coffers back by a small fortune. In today's money, think of it as dropping a cool $50,000 for a single evening's entertainment. And why such a hefty price tag? Because it wasn't just about feeding guests. It was about showcasing the kingdom's wealth and stability. After all, in a time when most folks were struggling to get their daily bread, serving up a menagerie of meats was the ultimate flex. Speaking of bread, let's talk about trencher bread. You see, plates weren't exactly en vogue yet, so the Tudors used thick slices of stale bread as makeshift dishes. Not the most appetizing thought, huh? But practicality ruled the day, and at least the bread served its purpose before being discarded or, if you were lucky, given to the poor. Waste not, want not, as they say, though in this case it was more about displaying your largesse than genuine philanthropy. And while we're myth-busting, let's tackle the idea that everyone at these feasts was gorging themselves senseless. Sure, the upper crust indulged, but for the rest, it was more about watching and waiting. The lucky few with a seat at the royal table might secure themselves a morsel of whatever Henry was having. But for many, it was a night of polite restraint rather than gluttonous abandon. And if you think being on the king's good side guaranteed a full belly, think again. A wrong word or ill-timed jest could see your plate quickly removed, leaving you to chew on regret. Let's not forget that the real meat of these gatherings was in the conversation. Dining with Henry was like playing verbal chess, with every compliment and comment carefully calculated. You weren't just feasting. You were navigating a minefield, with the king's mood swinging as unpredictably as a pendulum. One moment, he might regale the room with tales of his hunting prowess. The next, he'd be brooding over political matters, his temper simmering just below the surface. In such an environment, a keen wit and a silver tongue were your best allies, ensuring that you left the table with your head and your reputation intact. And while it might seem romantic to imagine yourself part of this grand pageantry, the reality was far less glamorous. The noise was deafening, the air thick with smoke and chatter, and the pressure to perform was relentless. Every bite you took was being scrutinized, every word weighed against the backdrop of court intrigue. As you sat there, clutching your goblet, you'd be acutely aware that this wasn't just dinner. It was a declaration of where you stood in the pecking order. As for Henry, his palate was as demanding as his policies. He expected the best, and anything less was an affront not just to his taste buds, but to his authority. This was a man who, according to some accounts, consumed up to 5,000 calories a day. No small feat in an era without snack bars and sodas. But those calories came at a cost. While the king feasted on rich meats and fine wines, the rest of England subsisted on bread and pottage, a humble stew that was the mainstay of the common folk. In the end, the Tudor banquet wasn't just about food. It was about power, prestige, and politics. It was where alliances were forged and broken, where fortunes were made and lost. The food was simply the backdrop to the real drama, the human drama of ambition, rivalry, and survival. So, as you take your last sip of wine and rise from the table, remember that in the Tudor court, every meal was a performance, and the stakes were always high. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow brings its own challenges, with more intrigue, more danger, and perhaps even a glimmer of opportunity. Stay tuned, because the day is far from over. As the last notes of the courtly feast fade, you might be tempted to think the day's drama is winding down. But hold onto your codpiece, because the Tudor court is just getting started. Forget your quiet afternoon tea. Here, entertainment is an extreme sport, and boredom is the enemy. The king's court wasn't just a hotbed of politics. It was the 16th century equivalent of a Las Vegas strip, minus the neon lights, but with plenty of spectacle to set your heart racing. First up, you've got jousting tournaments. Think of it as medieval NASCAR, but instead of cars, you've got knights on horseback thundering toward each other at full tilt. These guys aren't playing for a trophy. They're vying for honor, glory, and maybe a wink from a lady in the stands. The crowd's roar is like a rock concert, only with a lot more chainmail. But this isn't just a testosterone-fueled pastime. Oh no, it's Tudor PR at its finest. Let's delve into the economics of this medieval madness. Hosting a single tournament could cost the equivalent of tens of thousands of today's dollars. Why fork out such a fortune? Because every lance splintered and every helmet dented was a reminder of the king's might and the kingdom's prosperity. In an era where most folks were eking out a living on bread and pottage, showing off such lavish displays was like dangling a gold-plated carrot, proof that the kingdom was thriving, even when it was. Now, as much as we love the romantic notion of knights in shining armor, the reality was a bit grittier. Sure, the armor gleamed, but it also weighed up to 60 pounds, and the risk, very real. Jousting was dangerous, with even the best-natured matches sometimes ending in a stretcher ride, or worse. But hey, a little danger never stopped a Tudor from a good time. It was all part of the pageantry, a reminder that life was short and glory eternal. And if you think the thrill ended with the joust, think again. There was also bear-baiting, a pastime that makes modern reality TV look positively tame. Picture this, a bear chained in the center of an arena, set upon by a pack of dogs as the crowd bets on the outcome. It's brutal, it's bloody, and it's a spectacle that drew crowds like moths to a flame. The bear-baiting pits were the original Colosseums, where the grim spectacle was less about entertainment and more about distraction, a way to keep the populace focused on something other than their own hardships. Bear-baiting rings were common in London, generating revenue not just from ticket sales, but from the betting that went on in the stands. It was a grim reminder of the times, a society where life was cheap and entertainment was often as brutal as it was brief. But in a world where the average life expectancy hovered around 35 years, who could blame them for wanting a little excitement? Yet, underneath the adrenaline-pumping contests, the real action was happening in the quieter corners of the court. Here, the arts reigned supreme, and they weren't just a luxury, they were a weapon. Poetry, music, and theatre were tools in the hands of those savvy enough to wield them. Courtiers with a flair for the arts could curry favour, influence opinion, and even sway the king himself. A well-crafted sonnet might secure you a place in the royal favour, a political advantage more valuable than gold. Henry VIII himself was a patron of the arts, using them to burnish his image and cement his legacy. He wasn't just a king. He was a Renaissance man, commissioning tapestries and portraits that depicted him as a warrior, a scholar, a divine ruler. These art pieces were the Instagram of their day, carefully curated to project power and sophistication. The Holbein portraits of Henry, for instance, weren't just about capturing his likeness. They were about broadcasting his authority to every corner of Christendom. For the shrewd courtiers, the arts offered a stage upon which to play their own games. A flattering portrait or a well-received play could elevate a noble status, while a misstep could see them cast down as quickly as a failed actor. In this courtly drama, the artists and entertainers were the true power players. Their works a lasting testament to a time when words and images could change the course of history. And let's not forget the playwrights, the rock stars of the Tudor court. Long before Shakespeare pennied his first sonnet, the court was alive with performances that were as much about politics as they were about prose. Plays were performed not just for amusement, but as veiled commentary on the court's intrigues, offering a mirror to the machinations of the realm. A cleverly written allegory could win you allies or enemies, depending on which way the winds of favour blew. So, as you watch the afternoon's spectacle unfold, remember this. In the Tudor court, entertainment was never just about passing the time. It was a distraction, a display, and a dangerous game all rolled into one. Whether you were a knight in the lists, a bear in the pit, or a poet at the king's feet, you were part of a grand performance that was as much about power as it was about pleasure. And as the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the field, you know that the real show is only just beginning. Stay tuned, because in the court of Henry VIII, the night is young and the stakes are impossibly high. As the sun dips below the horizon, the Tudor court undergoes a transformation as profound as a peasant coming into an inheritance. The flickering torchlight dances off the stone walls, casting shadows that seem to whisper secrets of intrigue and ambition. You might think that after a day packed with jousting, bear-baiting, and verbal sparring with the best and worst of England's nobility, you'd be entitled to a bit of R&R. But alas, this is the Tudor court, where the concept of downtime is as foreign as the New World itself. Evening entertainment here is about as subtle as a Tudor ruff. The court gathers for perhaps its most theatrical display yet, masques and revels, a spectacle where allegory and artistry intermingle in a heady brew. Imagine a play, but with enough pomp and circumstance to make a modern awards show look like a humble book club. And the costumes, let's just say subtlety isn't on the menu. Silk, satin, and every hue imaginable parade before your eyes, each colour a symbol, each mask a statement. Here, the line between reality and performance blurs to the point of non-existence, and everyone is a player in Henry's grandiose game. Yet behind this dazzling facade lies a grim reality. Masks were more than just entertainment. They were propaganda in velvet and lace. Henry VIII, ever the shrewd operator, used them to reinforce his image, his court, and his politics. These performances were crafted to glorify the king and his reign, subtly reminding every courtier of the power that rested upon his broad shoulders. In an age without Instagram or Twitter, a well-choreographed mask was the ultimate PR stunt, projecting an image of a stable and prosperous kingdom, even as the reality might be a tad more tumultuous. And let's not forget the price tag. Staging one of these lavish affairs could cost upwards of £1,000, an astronomical sum in a time when the average yearly income for a laborer was closer to £5. But for Henry, the expense was a worthy investment in maintaining the illusion of a golden age. After all, what better way to distract from the kingdom's financial woes than with a spectacle so grand it would leave even the most sceptical courtier dazzled, and more importantly, distracted. As the evening progresses, and the wine flows as freely as the gossip, you realize that the real drama isn't confined to the stage. It's here, in the whispered conversations, the furtive glances, and the strategic alliances formed in shadowed alcoves. The court is an intricate dance of power and persuasion, where words are wielded as deftly as swords. And while the mask might end with a bow, the real performance continues long into the night. Reflecting on your day at the Tudor court, it's clear that every moment has been a masterclass in survival. From the perilous breakfast table, where the wrong choice of words could land you in hot water, to the high-stakes game of flattery and favour at lunch, every interaction has been a reminder of the precariousness of power. Even the evening's entertainments, with their veneer of merriment, hide a darker truth, that beneath the glittering surface lies a world where the price of misstep is often paid in blood. And so, as the curtain falls on this day in the life of the Tudor court, it's hard not to feel a twinge of gratitude for the comforts of the 21st century. It's easy to romanticize the past, with its chivalric ideals and grand gestures, but the reality is a far cry from the fairy tale. The Tudor court is a crucible of ambition, where survival demands cunning, resilience, and a healthy dose of luck. Each day is a test, not just of your ability to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics, but also of your capacity to endure the harsh realities of a world where life is as cheap as the ale. As you ponder the legacy of this bygone era, it becomes clear that the Tudors were masters of their own narrative. They knew the power of image and spectacle, and they wielded it with unmatched skill. Their story is one of grandeur and brutality, where the romance of power is inextricably linked to its inherent savagery. And while the Tudor court may be long gone, its lessons endure. That power, like beauty, is often only skin deep, and that the true measure of greatness lies not in the trappings of wealth or influence, but in the ability to shape the world in your image. So, as you tuck yourself into your memory foam mattress, savoring the simple joy of clean sheets and central heating, take a moment to reflect on the day's revelations. The Tudor court may have been a world of intrigue and peril, but it was also a testament to the enduring human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest times, art and ambition can shine through. And as you drift off to sleep, toothbrush firmly in hand, you can rest easy knowing that while the past may be full of mystery and allure, there's no place like the present. Feudal Japan was a world where titles could be as misleading as a cheap sushi buffet claiming to be authentic. At the top, you had the shogun, the real power player, the one pulling the strings like a master puppeteer. On the other hand, the emperor sat there, a regal figurehead, more akin to a spiritual mascot than a political powerhouse. Imagine a high-stakes game of chess where the emperor is the king piece, important but mostly stationary, while the shogun is the queen, darting around the board, making things happen. The shogun, whose title means military commander, was the head honcho of the military government, known as the Bakufu. This system kicked off in the late 12th century with Minamoto no Yoritomo, Japan's first shogun. Yoritomo didn't just stumble into power. He seized it through a series of conflicts known as the Genpei War, which spanned from 1180 to 1185. When the dust settled, he wasn't just any warlord. He was the warlord, wielding enough clout to keep the emperor in Kyoto busy with ceremonial duties rather than actual governance. The shogun's power wasn't just about military might, but also about economic control. They held the keys to the kingdom, literally, controlling everything from land distribution to the lucrative rice trade, an ancient version of ruling the oil fields. Meanwhile, the emperor, supposedly divine, and the legitimate ruler of Japan, was often reduced to a ceremonial figurehead. It was a bit like being the CEO of a huge corporation, but only having control over the office coffee machine. The emperor lived in Kyoto, surrounded by a court that was steeped in ritual and tradition, giving him a veneer of importance. But when it came to real decisions, the emperor had all the power of a decorative potted plant. This was the reality. The emperor reigned, but it was the shogun who ruled. And this arrangement worked surprisingly well for centuries, a testament to the Japanese knack for finding harmony in apparent contradictions. Now, let's talk about the samurai, those iconic warriors who have become the poster boys of Japanese culture. In pop culture, they're often depicted as noble knights of feudal Japan, clad in armor and driven by a code of honor known as Bushido, which sounds like something straight out of a martial arts movie. But let's pump the brakes on the romanticization express. While Bushido, with its emphasis on loyalty, martial arts mastery, and honor until death, did play a role in defining the samurai ethos, the reality was often more complex and less glamorous. Samurai were essentially the military nobility, a class of warriors who rose to prominence during the Kamakura period, 1180–513–33. They were originally foot soldiers, but over time they became a hereditary class, a bit like medieval European knights, but with more paperwork and fewer dragons. They were expected to be skilled in warfare, loyal to their lords, and prepared to die in battle. But let's not kid ourselves. Honor wasn't always the guiding star. Samurai, like any other group of people, were prone to the same human foibles: greed, betrayal, and ambition. The image of the samurai as paragons of virtue often runs headlong into historical reality, where samurai engaged in backstabbing politics, land grabs, and power plays that would make a soap opera writer blush. In terms of numbers, during the Tokugawa period, 1603–1868, there were about 2 million samurai, which sounds like a lot, but they represented only about 6% of the population. And while they were expected to be warriors, many samurai found themselves more often wielding a pen than a katana, working in bureaucratic roles or farming the lands that provided their income. Our romanticized vision of samurai charging into battle is somewhat skewed. Many were more concerned with paperwork and estate management than martial heroics. The samurai's relationship with their lords, or daimyo, was another layer of complexity. Daimyo were powerful landowners who controlled vast territories and had armies of samurai at their beck and call. Samurai served these lords in exchange for land or stipends, and their loyalty was to the daimyo rather than the shogun. It was a system rife with opportunities for intrigue and betrayal, as rival daimyo vied for power and influence. The samurai were often caught in the middle of these power struggles, their loyalty tested by shifting alliances and political maneuverings. Despite the romantic legends, the samurai were not always the stoic, honorable warriors we've come to know. They were human, with all the complexities and contradictions that come with it. Some samurai were indeed paragons of virtue, living by the code of Bushido, while others were opportunists who saw the samurai status as a means to an end. Yet it's this very complexity that makes their history so fascinating, a tapestry of loyalty and betrayal, honor and ambition, ideals and realities. So, as we peel back the layers of feudal Japan's social structure, we see a society that was anything but simple. The shogun wielded real power, while the emperor played the part of a divine figurehead. The samurai, with their swords and codes, were far more than mere warriors. They were a class of people navigating a world of complex loyalties and shifting power dynamics, their lives as much about survival and pragmatism as about honor and tradition. In the end, feudal Japan was a land of paradoxes, where appearances often masked deeper truths, and legends were born from the messy, fascinating reality of human history. As we peel back the layers of feudal Japan's social structure, the daimyo step onto the stage, wielding power and influence like a feudal version of a Vega's casino boss. These regional landlords were not just sitting pretty in their castles, twiddling their thumbs. Nope, they were the economic juggernauts of their time, managing vast tracts of land and the peasants who toiled on them. Imagine a chessboard where each square is a fiefdom, and the daimyo are the rooks, sliding across the board with strategic precision, always angling for a better position. Their game plan: control the land, control the wealth, and by extension, control the power. The daimyo were the linchpins of the feudal system, the movers and shakers who could make or break a shogun's day. At their peak, there were over 260 daimyo, each commanding a territory that could stretch from a few square miles to entire provinces. They derived their power from their ability to muster armies of samurai, who were more than happy to pledge their loyalty to these land-rich lords in exchange for a slice of the feudal pie. The daimyo's economic power was the bedrock of their political clout. They were like feudal CEOs, except instead of worrying about quarterly earnings reports, they were focused on rice yields and military campaigns. Now let's talk numbers, because nothing says power player like a good spreadsheet. During the Edo period, the annual rice yield, measured in koku, about 180 liters, was the standard unit of wealth. It was like the GDP of each fiefdom, a tangible measure of a daimyo's might. To put it into perspective, a daimyo with a 10,000 koku domain was considered powerful, enough rice to feed 10,000 people for a year. Some of the biggest fish in the daimyo pond, like the Mida clan, controlled domains yielding over 1 million koku. With that kind of wealth, they weren't just playing the game, they were rewriting the rulebook. But wealth wasn't enough to keep a daimyo's head on his shoulders, literally. In the cutthroat world of feudal Japan, alliances were as crucial as a well-timed sword strike. Enter the strategic marriages and political gymnastics that would make even the most seasoned diplomat sweat. Daimyo weren't just marrying off their daughters to any samurai with a nice family crest. Oh no, these marriages were power plays, calculated moves to strengthen alliances and secure loyalties. It was the original version of marry up and move up, except with more risk of decapitation. Relationships between daimyo were as volatile as a middle school cafeteria, with allegiances shifting faster than a samurai could draw his katana. The phrase, "keep your friends close and your enemies closer," might as well have been written in kanji, tattooed on every daimyo's forearm. These guys weren't just paranoid, they were pragmatic. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford, and betrayal was practically a rite of passage. In this high-stakes game, the daimyo's ability to read the political landscape was as critical as their skill in battle. The Sengoku period, or the Warring States period, was the ultimate test of a daimyo's mettle. From the mid-15th to the early 17th century, Japan was a patchwork of warring factions, each led by ambitious daimyo eyeing the top spot like it was the last cup of sake at a samurai party. The chaos was fueled by a lack of centralized authority, with the Ashikaga shogunate's grip slipping like a samurai on an ice rink. It was every daimyo for himself, a feudal free-for-all that would determine who would rise and who would fall. The daimyo's role as economic powerhouses was matched only by their military prowess. They weren't just sitting in their castles sipping tea. They were marshalling armies, building fortifications, and engaging in battles that would decide the fate of their domains. The Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 was a pivotal moment in this power struggle, a massive clash involving over 160,000 troops that determined the future of Japan. It was a winner-takes-all showdown, with Tokugawa Ieyasu emerging victorious and paving the way for the Tokugawa shogunate's rule, a dynasty that would last over 250 years. Yet, amidst the warfare and political maneuvering, the daimyo also played a critical role in shaping the cultural landscape of Japan. They were patrons of the arts, commissioning everything from no-theatre performances to intricate tea ceremonies. Their castles weren't just military fortresses, they were cultural hubs, places where the arts flourished alongside the martial. The daimyo may have been warriors, but they had an appreciation for the finer things in life, like a good haiku or a perfectly steeped cup of matcha. Despite their power, the daimyo were always walking a tightrope. The shogun had the ultimate authority to reassign their domains or, in extreme cases, force them to commit seppuku, the ritual suicide that was the ultimate act of loyalty and atonement. The daimyo's power was substantial but precarious, an ever-shifting dance of alliances and enmities that defined their existence. In the intricate tapestry of feudal Japan, the daimyo were the threads holding it all together, weaving a complex narrative of power, loyalty, and ambition. They were the architects of their fiefdoms, the strategists behind the alliances, and the commanders leading their armies into battle. The daimyo may have been playing a Game of Thrones long before Westeros was a twinkle in George R.R. Martin's eye, but their story is one of real power, real stakes, and real consequences. And as we'll see, their legacy is as enduring as it is fascinating, a testament to the enduring allure of power and the human desire to wield it. And speaking of real power, let's turn the spotlight on those helmet-clad legends, the samurai. These guys weren't just slicing through enemies like a hot knife through tofu. They were also the bureaucratic backbone of feudal Japan. Imagine your local DMV office, but instead of clerks, you've got a bunch of sword-wielding officials who could just as easily fill out a tax form as they could cleave a foe in two. That was the dual reality for many samurai. Part-time warriors, full-time pencil pushers. Now, before you start picturing samurai as ancient office drones, let's dive into what this dual role really meant. During the Edo period, Japan was surprisingly peaceful, almost like the calm after centuries of storm. The Tokugawa shogunate had effectively slammed the brakes on the endless cycle of warfare that had plagued the land, leaving many samurai with more time on their hands than a Netflix user on a weekend. With fewer opportunities to swing their swords, they swapped the battlefield for the boardroom, taking on roles as administrators, tax collectors, and even judges. But here's the kicker: maintaining that samurai lifestyle was not cheap. Just like owning a sports car today, it was all fun and games until you had to start paying for the upkeep. Armor, horses, weapons, none of it came for free. So, what's a samurai to do when the paycheck from their lord barely covers the cost of their lacquered armor and custom-forged katana? Enter moonlighting as tax collectors. Yep, these fearsome warriors had to double as the IRS, knocking on peasant doors and collecting those sweet, sweet rice taxes. Talk about a side hustle. The financial strain on samurai households was as real as a katana's edge. During the Edo period, a typical samurai stipend was measured in koku, the same unit used to measure the daimyo's domains. On average, a lower-ranking samurai might earn about 100 koku per year. Sounds decent until you realize that's just enough to feed a household with zero room for luxuries. And if you think trying to make ends meet on that salary was rough, imagine the social pressure to maintain appearances. A samurai without his armor was like a knight without his shining suit, completely out of place. But let's not get too bogged down in financial woes. We've got a code to crack. Ah, yes, the Bushido Code, a term that's been romanticized to high heaven in popular culture. Bushido, or the Way of the Warrior, sounds like something straight out of a samurai epic, with tales of loyalty, honor, and self-sacrifice. The truth, however, is a bit murkier. While Bushido did emphasize virtues like loyalty and courage, it wasn't a standardized set of rules etched in stone tablets. Instead, it evolved over time, shaped by the practical needs of the samurai class. In fact, much of what we associate with Bushido today was retroactively applied during the peaceful Edo period, when samurai were more likely to face an ink spill than a blood spill. As samurai took on more bureaucratic roles, the Bushido Code was adapted to include virtues like honesty and benevolence, qualities that looked great on a family crest, but were trickier to uphold in the cutthroat world of feudal politics. So while the notion of a noble samurai living by an unbreakable code is appealing, it often collided headfirst with the messy reality of political intrigue and personal ambition. And let's not forget seppuku, or ritual suicide, often touted as the ultimate expression of samurai honor. If you think this practice was widespread, think again. Sure, it happened, but not with the frequency that samurai films would have you believe. Seppuku was a highly ritualized, last-resort affair, typically reserved for the most severe breaches of honor. In reality, many samurai found more creative, less painful ways to navigate the treacherous waters of feudal Japan, without resorting to such drastic measures. So, as we dissect the layers of samurai life, it becomes clear that these warriors were far more than just sword-swinging paragons of virtue. They were complex individuals, juggling the demands of warfare and administration, honor and practicality. The samurai class was a microcosm of feudal Japan itself, a blend of tradition and adaptation, where the legendary met the mundane. As we continue to explore this intricate tapestry, let's remember that behind every myth lies a grain of truth, and behind every truth, a story waiting to be told. As we unravel the intricate layers of feudal Japan, it's time to zoom in on the unsung heroes of this historical drama: the peasants, artisans, and merchants. These folks were the real MVPs, the economic backbone holding up the entire shogunate, while the samurai were busy perfecting their swordplay, and the daimyo were playing their own Game of Thrones. Their world was one where rice wasn't just a staple food, but the currency of power, where social rules were as rigid as a samurai's armor, and where survival meant playing a perpetual game of feudal leapfrog. Let's start with the peasants, or as I like to call them, the rice farmers extraordinaire. These guys were the original work-from-home crowd, toiling on the land that fed the entire nation. But don't be fooled by those romantic ukiyo-e prints depicting tranquil rural scenes. The life of a peasant was anything but idyllic. Imagine working from sunrise to sunset, knee-deep in mud, all while knowing that the fruits of your labor, specifically up to 40% of your rice yield, will be whisked away as tax to support your lord's lavish lifestyle. That's right, they were the original tax-paying citizens, and boy, did they pay through the nose. The rice-based economy was the heart of feudal Japan, a bit like the oil of its day, dictating wealth and power. Everything revolved around rice, from taxes to salaries. The annual rice harvest was measured in koku, with one koku being roughly enough rice to feed one person for a year. For a peasant family, producing enough koku for themselves and the taxman was a delicate balancing act akin to performing a high-wire circus act without a safety net. And heaven forbid if a bad harvest struck. Famine wasn't just a hypothetical scenario. It was a grim reality that could decimate entire villages. Despite these hardships, peasants were bound by strict social rules. They were at the bottom of the totem pole, a rung or two below the samurai, artisans, and merchants. Yet, they were the ones who kept the economic engine running. Their lives were governed by the five-family system, or goningumi, a collective responsibility arrangement that would make any HOA look like a walk in the park. If one family couldn't pay their taxes, the others had to pick up the slack, meaning everyone had a vested interest in keeping each other in line. It was a community effort, albeit one with a punitive edge. Failure could lead to public humiliation or worse. Transitioning from mud to metal, let's talk about artisans, the skilled craftspeople who turned raw materials into objects of beauty and utility. Artisans, like the proverbial cobbler who never has shoes, were crucial yet often overlooked players in the feudal society. These were the folks who crafted the samurai's armor, forged their katanas, and built the castles that dotted the Japanese landscape. They had a singular focus on craftsmanship, honing their skills like a sushi chef perfects his knife work. Yet artisans were caught in a paradox. While their skills were highly valued, they were still considered lower in status than the samurai and daimyo they served. They lived in segregated areas called chonin districts, where each artisan was part of a guild that regulated their work and prices. It was a bit like being in a feudal labor union, minus the collective bargaining power. These guilds were essential for maintaining quality and ensuring that artisans didn't undercut each other, because even in the 17th century, nobody liked a price war. And then there were the merchants, the clever, cunning chameleons of feudal Japan. Officially, they occupied the lowest rung of the social ladder, below even the peasants. After all, what could be more suspicious than someone who made money without lifting a hammer or ploughing a field? But don't let that fool you. Merchants were the original hustlers, the ones who knew that money talked louder than any Bushido code. Merchants navigated the rigid social hierarchy with the skill of a ninja, trading everything from rice to silk, and in the process, accumulating wealth that would make a daimyo blush. They were the silent partners in the economic dance, funding the lavish lifestyles of the samurai and their lords. Over time, some merchants became so wealthy that they were able to buy their way into the samurai class, a loophole in the social system that was as rare as a four-leaf clover, but just as prized. The reality of rural life often clashed with the bucolic images that are so fondly remembered today. Peasants labored tirelessly and lived under constant threat of starvation, disease, and the whims of nature. Artisans, despite their essential role, were bound to their guilds and restricted by rigid social hierarchies. Merchants, though often reviled, were the economic innovators of their time, finding ways to thrive in a society that officially shunned their ambition. In this world, where rice was currency and social mobility was as rare as a samurai discounting his honor, every day was a test of resilience and ingenuity. The peasants, artisans, and merchants of feudal Japan were the unsung heroes who, despite their lowly status, held the world together. They were the underdogs of history, proving that sometimes the most powerful stories come from those who toil away from the spotlight. And just like that, we've peeled back another layer of feudal Japan's social structure, revealing a world where the backbone of society was as much about grit and perseverance as it was about rice and koku. But our journey doesn't end here. As we continue to navigate the complexities of this fascinating period, we'll uncover even more about the lives and legacies of those who lived in the shadow of the samurai and daimyo, proving that in history, as in life, it's often the quietest voices that leave the loudest echoes. Now, as we transition from the dusty roads of feudal Japan's daily grind, let's fast forward to the societal shake-up that ushered in the Edo period, a time when Japan hit the pause button on its chaotic history, told everyone to chill out, and locked its doors to the outside world. The Tokugawa shogunate, under the savvy leadership of Tokugawa Ieyasu, was like that one friend who insists on a quiet night in after years of wild parties. And let me tell you, this era of enforced peace and isolation was as much about maintaining control as it was about cultivating a uniquely Japanese identity. The Edo period, spanning from 1603 to 1868, was a time when Japan decided to go full introvert, shutting itself off from the rest of the world with its sakoku policy, literally, the closed country edict. Picture it, Japan, a nation that had been a hotbed of samurai swordplay and political intrigue, now becoming a hermit kingdom. Foreigners, no, thank you. Foreign trade, only in Nagasaki and under very strict conditions. It was like a country-sized game of hide-and-seek. But Japan wasn't coming out anytime soon. This isolationist policy wasn't just about keeping foreign influences at bay. It was about solidifying the social hierarchy, keeping the Tokugawa firmly in power, and preventing any pesky daimyo from getting ideas above their station. The shogunate imposed a strict class system, with samurai, peasants, artisans, and merchants each neatly slotted into their respective social boxes. Sure, it sounds like a well-organized society, but let's be real. It was more like a pressure cooker with the lid firmly clamped down. Yet, while the samurai class found itself increasingly relegated to bureaucratic tasks, and the peasants continued their eternal tango with rice paddies, something curious happened. The merchant class, those so-called lower-rung dwellers, began to thrive in this stable environment. With peace reigning supreme, there was more money to be made, and make it they did. Merchants became the shadow puppeteers of the economy, their wealth growing quietly under the noses of the samurai, who were too busy maintaining their traditional image to notice the shifting sands beneath them. The irony. While samurai walked around with swords, merchants wielded the true power, coin. They were like the nerdy kid in school who suddenly becomes the tech mogul after graduation. They operated behind the scenes, trading in silk, sake, and other goods, their influence growing as they mastered the art of commerce. And as the Edo period unfolded, the rigid social hierarchy started to fray at the edges, like an old kimono worn one too many times. But let's not get too comfortable in this peaceful bubble. The isolationist policies, while keeping foreign powers at bay, also meant that Japan missed out on the technological advancements sweeping across the world. By the time Commodore Matthew Perry showed up in 1853 with his black ships and a demand for Japan to open up, the country was like a hermit who just discovered the internet, overwhelmed and underprepared. Perry's arrival was a wake-up call, one that would eventually lead to the collapse of the Tokugawa shogunate and the end of the feudal era. The societal changes that followed were swift and seismic. The Meiji Restoration in 1868 was like a historical reset button, as Japan scrambled to modernize and catch up with the industrialized world. The samurai class, once the backbone of Japanese society, found themselves obsolete overnight, their swords no match for rifles and cannons. Many samurai transitioned into roles as bureaucrats, military officers, and educators, but the romantic image of the sword-wielding warrior was relegated to the annals of history and the pages of manga. Yet the echoes of the feudal system still resonate in modern Japan. The emphasis on hierarchy, discipline, and social order, hallmarks of the Edo period, are woven into the fabric of Japanese culture. The meticulous attention to detail and craftsmanship revered during the feudal era can be seen in everything from sushi preparation to technology design. Even the collective spirit, the idea of putting the group before the individual, traces its roots back to the communal rice farming practices of the peasants. And let's not forget the legacy of the samurai. Though their swords now gather dust in museums, the ideals of Bushido, honor, loyalty, and perseverance remain cultural touchstones. They're the backbone of corporate Japan, where loyalty to one's company can rival that of a samurai to his lord. The samurai ethos may have been romanticized, but it continues to inspire, from office workers to anime heroes. As we wrap up our journey through feudal Japan, it's clear that this period was more than just a colorful backdrop for samurai movies. It was a time of profound social engineering, economic innovation, and cultural development. The feudal system, with all its rigid structures and unwritten rules, laid the foundation for a society that would transform itself into a global powerhouse within a few generations. So, the next time you enjoy a bowl of rice or admire a piece of Japanese craftsmanship, take a moment to appreciate the layers of history embedded within. The legacy of feudal Japan is not just in the samurai swords and castle ruins, but in the values, traditions, and innovation that continue to define Japan today. It's a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a living narrative that shapes our present and future. And with that, we've reached the end of our historical journey, a tale of warriors and farmers, isolation and innovation, myths and realities. As the samurai might say, itadakimasu. In the grand theatre of ancient history, where drama had no shortage of scripts, Alexander the Great's campaign across Asia was less of a play and more of a high-stakes action film. This guy wasn't just out for a weekend road trip when he set off in 334 BCE. He embarked with a massive entourage, a few tens of thousands strong, on a mission that would cover over 10,000 miles. And yes, there were no GPS satellites or Uber Eats back then. Moving that many people through the deserts of Persia and mountains of Afghanistan required a logistical setup that would make today's supply chain managers break into a cold sweat. Let's start with the man of the hour, Alexander. Born in 356 BCE in Macedonia, he was the son of King Philip II, a man who'd already started the Macedonian dominance tour by unifying Greece. But Alexander wanted more than just a Greek toga party. He had visions of empire that stretched as far as his imagination, which, as it turns out, was pretty darn far. By the age of 20, he was king, and just 2 years later, he decided it was high time to take his army on a little jaunt across the known world. Now, calling Alexander a military genius isn't just a compliment. It's an understatement. His battlefield tactics were like a masterclass in ancient warfare. Take the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE, for example. Here, Alexander faced off against the Persian king Darius III, who had a much larger force. But size doesn't always matter, right? Alexander's strategy involved his famous phalanx formation and a clever use of cavalry to exploit the weaknesses in the Persian lines. The result? Darius fled like a cat from a cucumber, leaving behind his family and a considerable amount of wealth. But let's not get too starry-eyed over his supposed liberator status. Sure, he sometimes portrayed himself as a savior, freeing the people from the oppressive Persian yoke. Yet, for many, his arrival was like trading one set of shackles for another. His conquests often meant high taxes, forced cultural assimilation, and the occasional massacre if you didn't play ball. This wasn't a charity tour. It was empire-building with a side of cultural exchange, whether you liked it or not. Moving an army in those days wasn't just about marching from point A to point B, it was about feeding tens of thousands of men. And let's not forget, their horses. Horses don't exactly thrive on sand and rocks, you know. The logistics were staggering. Ancient sources say Alexander's army included around 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. That's a lot of mouths to feed and hooves to shoe. The supply chain had to stretch back to Macedonia and include local resources along the way. He relied heavily on local foraging, requisitioning, a polite term for taking what they needed, and establishing supply depots. In modern terms, think of it as a massive, mobile farmers' market that occasionally pillaged the neighborhood. The financial burden was no joke either. Campaigning was expensive. It's estimated that Alexander inherited a kingdom with 600 talents in debt, a talent being about 57 pounds of silver, and the costs only grew as his ambitions did. His expedition into Asia was not just a military campaign, but an economic one, fueling itself on the treasures of conquered cities. Plunder was not just a perk, it was a necessity to keep the war machine running. And then we have the matter of Alexander's persona as the great liberator. It's easy to get swept up in the romance of his tale. The young, charismatic leader cutting through the Gordian knot, taming the untamable horse Bucephalus, and besting every foe. But liberation often came with a hefty price tag. Cities that resisted faced dire consequences, and those that surrendered were often coerced into the Macedonian way of life. The cultural blending that he instigated, later known as Hellenization, was a double-edged sword. It spread Greek culture far and wide, but it also diluted and sometimes erased local traditions. Still, one can't deny the sheer audacity and vision of Alexander. He was, in many ways, a product of his time, a man whose dreams of unity through conquest were as much about personal glory as they were about spreading Hellenic ideals. His empire, though short-lived, spoiler, It all fell apart pretty spectacularly after his death in 323 BCE, set the stage for the Hellenistic world, a period marked by profound cultural exchanges and advancements in science, art, and philosophy. So we salute Alexander, the man who took ancient road trips to the extreme, who blended the old with the new, and who left a legacy as complex as the man himself. Whether you see him as a hero or a tyrant, there's no denying he left an indelible mark on history. And so, just like that, in 323 BCE, the man who had turned the world into his personal chessboard was suddenly gone, leaving behind an empire as vast as it was volatile. Alexander the Great, whose ambitions and hubris seemed to know no bounds, was now a memory. While poets might wax lyrical about how the heavens wept for their fallen hero, the reality was far less poetic. His untimely exit at the age of 32 was more like pulling the plug on a colossal, complex machine mid-operation. The empire, which stretched from Greece to Egypt and as far as the fringes of India, was a sprawling jigsaw puzzle. And guess what? The pieces were about to scatter in every direction. Enter the diadochi, a Greek term that translates to successors, though power-hungry opportunists might be more apt. These were Alexander's generals and companions, men who'd fought alongside him and now had their sights set on carving up his empire like a Thanksgiving turkey. And just like that, the myth of Alexander's invincibility began to unravel. Even the greatest conqueror couldn't conquer mortality, and his empire, without a clear heir, thanks for not writing a will, Alex, was ripe for the picking. The stage was set for a power struggle of epic proportions, one that would make Game of Thrones look like a minor family squabble over the TV remote. First up, we have Perdiccas, who Alexander supposedly handed his signet ring to on his deathbed. Was this a tacit endorsement to rule in his stead, or just a moment of delirium? The jury's still out. Either way, Perdiccas assumed the role of regent, but his authority was as shaky as a house of cards in a windstorm. He was supposed to rule on behalf of Alexander's half-brother, Ohidius, who had his own set of challenges, not least of which was a lack of political acumen. Then there's Ptolemy, the wily fox who decided that Egypt looked like a nice slice of the pie. He seized control of this rich and strategically vital region, setting the stage for what would become the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of rulers that would last nearly 300 years. Ptolemy wasn't just a savvy general. He was a master of propaganda, spinning tales of Alexander's divine heritage in Egypt to bolster his legitimacy. It was a classic case of, if you can't be king of somewhere else. Meanwhile, in Asia Minor, Antigonus one-eyed. Yes, he was literally missing an eye, but don't let that fool you into thinking he lacked vision, was carving out his own domain. With his son Demetrius, nicknamed the Besieger for his knack in, well, besieging cities, Antigonus sought to control the vast territories in Asia. Their ambition was as large as Alexander's, but their ability to hold it all together was another matter entirely. And let's not forget Seleucus, who established the Seleucid Empire, stretching from the Aegean to the Indus. His territories covered much of the old Persian Empire, and like his peers, he leveraged Alexander's legacy to legitimize his rule. The Seleucids would become known for their cultural diffusion, blending Greek and Eastern traditions in a way that would leave an indelible mark on history. As these power players maneuvered, the empire was divided and subdivided again, a patchwork quilt of ambition and betrayal. The wars of the diadochi, as they came to be known, were a series of conflicts that spanned decades, filled with shifting alliances and backstabbing so frequent it might as well have been a handshake. These wars were costly, not just in terms of human lives, but also economically. The constant campaigning drained treasuries and destabilized regions, leading to widespread economic turmoil. In the midst of this chaos, the myth of Alexander as a unifying force crumbled. His dream of a single, cohesive empire gave way to the harsh reality of human nature. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The generals who once hailed Alexander as their leader were now consumed by the very ambitions he had fostered. Yet, despite the fragmentation, the Hellenistic world continued to thrive in unexpected ways. The cultural exchanges Alexander initiated endured, and cities like Alexandria became centers of learning and innovation, a testament to the enduring legacy of Hellenization. So, while Alexander's empire fractured into myriad pieces, each governed by its own would-be king, the seeds he planted took root in the fertile soil of cultural fusion. The world he left behind was one of opportunity and conflict, where the lines between conqueror and conquered blurred, and where the legacy of a man who dreamed of unity was measured not by the lands he conquered, but by the cultures he connected. In this swirling cauldron of intrigue and ambition, the Diadochi reshaped the political landscape, each carving out their own fiefdoms and establishing dynasties that would rule for centuries. Their rivalries and alliances were as fleeting as the wind, constantly shifting as each sought to outmaneuver the others. The dream of a united empire was dead, but the Hellenistic age had just begun, an era of unprecedented cultural and intellectual flourishing. It was a testament to the paradox of Alexander's legacy, a world forever changed by the ambitions of one man, yet fractured by the very forces he unleashed. Stay tuned, because the saga of this tumultuous aftermath is far from over. And so, with the political map looking more like a Jackson Pollock painting than a unified empire, the Hellenistic age dawned, a period where cultures collided, mingled, and occasionally embarrassed themselves at the metaphorical dance floor of civilization. Alexander's empire might have shattered into 1,000 pieces, but it left behind a vibrant mosaic that would redefine the ancient world. First up, let's talk cultural fusion. Picture a massive ancient blender, minus the annoying noise, churning out a mix of Greek and Eastern traditions that would make even the most eclectic of modern art collectors raise an eyebrow. This wasn't just about adopting the local dress code or sampling exotic cuisines. It was an intellectual and artistic renaissance that would make Leonardo da Vinci look like a procrastinator. Take Alexandria, for example, the crown jewel of this new world order. Founded in 331 BCE by Alexander himself, this city became a melting pot of cultures and ideas. It was like the Silicon Valley of antiquity, except with more togas and fewer tech billionaires. Scholars from Greece, Egypt, Persia and beyond flocked to its legendary library, a place so packed with scrolls that even Marie Kondo would have a hard time tidying up. At its peak, the Library of Alexandria housed an estimated 400,000 to 700,000 scrolls. That's a lot of papyrus, folks. Imagine trying to find your favorite scroll on a lazy Sunday afternoon. This intellectual hub wasn't just about hoarding knowledge, it was about creating it. The city was a breeding ground for scientific advancements. Take Euclid, the father of geometry. Around 300 BCE, he pennied Elements, a mathematical magnum opus that would be the go-to geometry textbook for over 1,000 years. Talk about leaving a lasting impression. Then there was Eratosthenes, who not only headed the library, but also calculated the Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy, getting within a few hundred miles of the actual figure. He didn't have Google Earth, just 2 sticks, a shadow, and a bit of clever thinking. Meanwhile, in the realm of philosophy, the Greeks were busy doing what they did best, asking a lot of questions. Enter the Stoics and Epicureans, 2 schools of thought that emerged during the Hellenistic period. Think of them as the ancient world's version of self-help gurus. The Stoics, led by Zeno of Citium, preached that virtue was the only good and that emotions were the root of all evil. Basically, they were the ones telling you to keep calm and carry on while the world burned around you. On the flip side, the Epicureans, followers of Epicurus, believed in seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, but not in a hedonistic binge kind of way. They were more about enjoying the simple things in life, like a quiet dinner with friends. Maybe they were onto something. The arts, too, underwent a transformation. Gone were the rigid forms of classical Greek sculpture. Hellenistic artists embraced realism and emotion, capturing the drama and dynamism of the human experience. Statues like the Laocoon and his sons, displayed a level of detail and movement that would have made Michelangelo swoon. These artists weren't just carving marble. They were capturing life in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Now, you might be thinking, this all sounds pretty harmonious. But let's not get too carried away. The fusion of cultures wasn't always smooth. Imagine Greeks trying to grapple with the concept of Eastern monarchies, which often involved rulers being treated like living gods. For the democracy-loving Greeks, this was a bit like trying to understand why anyone would willingly watch reality TV. Awkward exchanges were inevitable. And then there was the language barrier. Greek became the lingua franca of the Hellenistic world, akin to English today. But just because everyone was speaking Greek did mean they were always on the same page. Misunderstandings abounded, some as comedic as a Shakespearean comedy of errors. Economic exchanges, too, were a mixed bag. On one hand, the Hellenistic world saw an unprecedented flow of goods and ideas. Trade routes crisscrossed the empire, bringing spices, silk, and precious metals from the east to the bustling markets of the Mediterranean. On the other hand, this economic boom was a double-edged sword. It fueled the ambitions of local rulers who were more interested in fattening their coffers than in the lofty ideals of cultural exchange. The result? A world where wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few, while many toiled in poverty, a tale as old as time. Despite the inevitable bumps along the way, the Hellenistic period was a testament to the power of cultural fusion. It was a time when the boundaries of what was possible expanded as rapidly as Alexander's armies had once marched. The world was no longer a series of isolated communities, but a connected web of exchange and innovation. This legacy, born from the ambitions of a single man, would echo through the ages, influencing everything from Roman politics to Renaissance art. So, while the Diadochi were busy playing their high-stakes game of Risk, the rest of the world was reaping the benefits of this cultural cross-pollination. It was a period that proved once and for all that when cultures collide, they don't just clash. They create, innovate, and transform. The Hellenistic age was just getting started, and trust me, the story only gets more interesting from here. Stay tuned, because the next chapters in this saga are packed with even more twists, turns, and timeless tales of human ambition. Now, let's shift gears from the mesmerizing dance of cultural fusion to the gritty reality of economic expansion and its inevitable hangover, the boom and bust cycles of the Hellenistic kingdoms. If you thought today's economy was a roller coaster, wait until you hear about the ancient world's version of financial whiplash. Alexander's conquests were like a match to dry tinder, igniting a blaze of economic activity across the known world. When he wasn't busy cutting Gordian knots or naming cities after himself, Alexander was transforming trade routes like a maestro conducting an orchestra. His campaigns opened up a veritable Silk Road of new pathways, stretching from the bustling markets of Greece to the far-flung bazaars of India and beyond. In essence, he turned the Mediterranean into a global trade superhighway, long before the Romans ever laid a single cobblestone. And with these new routes came the lifeblood of any economy, currency. Under Alexander, the introduction of standardized coinage was a game-changer. He minted coins adorned with his own image, a not-so-subtle reminder of who was calling the shots. These coins, crafted from the spoils of war, were like the ancient world's version of the dollar bill, universally recognized and accepted. The drachma became the currency of choice, facilitating trade and lending an air of stability in an otherwise chaotic landscape. Imagine the economic boost when merchants from Egypt to Babylon could finally haggle in a common currency. It was like handing them a credit card with no foreign transaction fees. But as with any economic boom, there was the inevitable bust. The Hellenistic kingdoms were a bit like overzealous teenagers at a buffet, eagerly piling up their plates without a thought for the consequences. The newfound wealth led to lavish spending by rulers who fancied themselves as mini-Alexanders. They constructed opulent palaces, funded grandiose projects, and indulged in luxuries from distant lands. It was a classic case of living beyond their means, and the bill was about to come due. The economic disparities that emerged were as glaring as a neon sign in a dark alley. While the elite bathed in luxury, the average citizen often found themselves drowning in debt. Wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few, while many struggled to make ends meet, a tale as old as time. The gap between the haves and the have-nots grew wider, creating a simmering pot of social tension that was bound to boil over. And boil over it did. The economic instability was compounded by the political fragmentation of Alexander's empire. The successors, or diadochi, were more interested in lining their own pockets and waging wars than in maintaining a stable economy. The constant conflicts drained treasuries faster than you could say inflation, leading to financial crises that would make modern economists wince. Let's not forget the toll of warfare on trade. As territories changed hands and new rulers imposed their own taxes and tariffs, trade routes became less like superhighways and more like obstacle courses. Merchants faced a gauntlet of tolls and fees as they navigated the patchwork quilt of Hellenistic kingdoms, each with its own rules and regulations. The dream of a unified economic system was as elusive as the elusive peace Alexander himself had once envisioned. The irony, of course, is that while the Hellenistic rulers were busy playing their high-stakes game of Monopoly, ordinary folks were left holding the bag. Inflation eroded savings, and the once thriving markets began to sputter. It was a classic case of the rich getting richer while the poor got, well, poorer. Sound familiar? It's a scenario that echoes through the ages, from the tulip mania of the 17th century to the housing bubble of 2008. As the Hellenistic kingdoms waded through these economic quagmires, their decline was inevitable. The financial missteps, combined with political instability, set the stage for their eventual fall. The once great cities of the Hellenistic world, like Alexandria and Antioch, would face their own reckonings, their glory days fading into memory as new powers rose to prominence. But before we draw any conclusions about the fall of the Hellenistic states, let's pause and consider the broader impact of Alexander's economic legacy. Despite the financial turmoil, his conquests left an indelible mark on the world, creating a web of interconnected economies that would influence trade for centuries to come. The seeds of globalization were sown in those ancient marketplaces, setting the stage for the complex economic systems we know today. So, as we wrap up this chapter of the Hellenistic saga, remember that history is more than just a series of dates and events. It's a tapestry woven from the ambitions, dreams, and failures of those who came before us. The Hellenistic age was a time of unprecedented change, a testament to the human capacity for innovation and folly. And as we move forward, exploring the final act of this ancient drama, let's keep our eyes open to the lessons of the past. After all, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it, and nobody wants to retake that class. Stay tuned for the final chapter in our exploration of Alexander's legacy, where we'll delve into the cultural and intellectual ripples that continue to shape our world today. So, as we embark on the last leg of our Hellenistic adventure, let's start by taking a step back and surveying the vast chessboard Alexander left behind. Spoiler alert. His legacy didn't just fade into the sands of history like a forgotten child's sandcastle. Instead, it paved the way for the Roman Empire, setting in motion a series of cultural and political dominoes that have been tumbling ever since. Picture this: the Romans, those toga-wearing, aqueduct-building maestros, essentially piggybacked on the Hellenistic blueprint. When Alexander's empire shattered into a patchwork of warring states, it left a power vacuum as enticing to Rome as a free buffet to a hungry crowd. The Romans were the inheritors of Hellenistic culture, but they weren't just museum curators preserving Greek art and philosophy. No, they took those cultural threads and wove them into something distinctly Roman, a tapestry of law, governance, and military prowess that would shape the Western world for millennia. Let's talk numbers. By the time Julius Caesar rolled up in the 1st century BCE, Rome had absorbed much of what was once Alexander's empire. They didn't just conquer territory. They assimilated ideas, and unlike some ancient empires, they were remarkably efficient about it. The Roman Empire at its zenith controlled a staggering 5 million square kilometers. They inherited the Hellenistic penchant for city building and knowledge gathering, evidenced by the fact that they kept and expanded the libraries and academies Alexander had sparked into existence. Alexandria, for instance, remained a beacon of learning under Roman rule, continuing to churn out intellectual heavyweights like Ptolemy, the astronomer who gave us the geocentric model of the universe. Sure, he got it wrong, but hey, nobody's perfect. The Roman appropriation of Greek culture wasn't just about keeping the brainy bits alive, though. It was about integrating them into Roman daily life. Greek became the second language of the educated Roman elite, a bit like English functions globally today. And let's be honest, nothing says we're culturally sophisticated like hosting a symposium while quoting Homer in the original Greek. The Romans even nicked Greek gods, giving them Roman makeovers. Zeus became Jupiter, Ares was recast as Mars. It's the ancient world's version of a cultural remix, with Rome acting as the DJ. But before we get too misty-eyed over this cultural fusion, let's pull back the curtain on Alexander's personal mythos. The man has been credited with everything from spreading enlightenment to supposedly untying the Gordian knot, a feat that's more PR stunt than historical fact. Cutting through it with a sword. Sure, he solved the problem, but it was less about cunning and more about brute force, a recurring theme in his story. Then there's the legend of Alexander's untimely death, which has been the subject of speculation and conspiracy theories for centuries. Was it fever, poison, or maybe a case of ancient overindulgence? The truth is murky, but what's clear is that his sudden departure at the ripe old age of 32 left his empire in chaos. It's like the ultimate mic drop, but with far graver consequences. Say what you will about his strategic genius. If he'd drafted a will, history might have been spared a lot of bloodshed. Alexander's so-called quest for unity and enlightenment often came with a price tag few were willing to pay. The cultural exchange he championed was as much about imposing Greek ideals as it was about embracing diversity. His legacy is a cocktail of ambition and contradiction, with a shot of megalomania for good measure. He spread Greek culture like a wildfire, but in doing so, he often obliterated the local customs and identities that stood in his way. And yet, despite these contradictions, Alexander's legacy is not just a cautionary tale. It's a testament to the enduring power of cultural diffusion. His empire, short-lived though it was, kick-started a wave of intellectual and artistic flourishing that outlived the man himself. It was a world where thinkers like Archimedes could ponder mathematical theorems while lounging in a bathtub, and where the philosophies of Socrates and Plato would lay the groundwork for Western thought. In the end, Alexander's legacy is a bit like a Rorschach test, subject to interpretation. Is he the hero who united the East and West, or the conqueror whose ambition knew no bounds? Like most historical figures, the truth lies somewhere in between. His story is a reminder that history isn't just shaped by the victors, but also by the dreamers and the flawed human beings who dared to reshape the world. So, as we close the book on this Hellenistic saga, let's take a moment to reflect on the broader strokes of history. Alexander's conquests set the stage for a world interconnected by trade, ideas, and culture. It was a world where knowledge was power, and the legacy of one man's ambition became the bedrock upon which future civilizations would build. From the bustling streets of ancient Alexandria to the halls of modern academia, his influence echoes through time, reminding us that the past is never truly past. It's merely the prologue to our own unfolding story. Thus, the tale of Alexander the Great doesn't end with his death. It evolves, spanning centuries and continents, echoing through the ages as a complex blend of myth, reality, and enduring influence. Whether we view him as a visionary or a tyrant, his legacy invites us to question the nature of power, the impact of cultural exchange, and the indelible mark one person can leave on the tapestry of history. And that, dear listeners, is a legacy worth remembering. So there he stood, Pharaoh Khufu, looking out over the vastness of the Egyptian desert, probably thinking something along the lines of, "Go big or go home." But Khufu wasn't just thinking big. He was thinking colossal, like the kind of colossal that makes today's skyscrapers look like Lego towers. He wanted a pyramid that would be the mother of all pyramids, a structure so magnificent that it would scream, "I was here," for thousands of years. And boy, did he deliver. The Great Pyramid of Giza wasn't just a construction project. It was the ultimate flex in architectural ambition. We're talking about a behemoth made up of roughly 3 million limestone blocks. To put that in perspective, that's like stacking up every bad decision you've made in your life, and then some. Each block weighed in at about 25 tons. So if you're imagining a few brawny dudes hauling these around, think again. This was a logistical nightmare that would make even the most seasoned project manager break out in a cold sweat. Now, let's get one thing straight. Ancient Egyptians didn't have the luxury of cranes or even the wheel at their disposal. Nope, they couldn't just call up an Uber for a quick lift to Giza. They relied on pure human grit, a few sledges, and a whole lot of elbow grease. The process of moving these blocks from the quarries, which were conveniently located miles away, involved dragging them across desert terrain. And they didn't have GPS to guide them through the shortest route either. If you've ever cursed at your map app for leading you astray, spare a thought for these folks. And then there was the workforce. We're talking tens of thousands of laborers, not slaves, as popular myth often suggests, but skilled workers and seasonal laborers who were likely incentivized with the ancient equivalent of a 401k. You know, food, shelter, and maybe a shot at divine favor. These people were the unsung heroes of this monumental task, clocking in every day to move mountains, literally. Imagine the organization involved. Task forces for quarrying, transport teams, precision cutters, and then the guys who had to fit each block into place with the kind of precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep. This was ancient Egypt's version of a full-scale industrial complex, minus the hard hats and safety regulations. And somehow, they pulled it off with mind-boggling efficiency. The sheer scale of manpower and resources required was enough to make any economist of the time, and today, raise an eyebrow. The economic engine behind this project was as impressive as the pyramid itself. The pharaoh's treasury had to keep the workforce fed, housed, and motivated, a feat akin to running a small city. Grain, beer, and bread weren't just sustenance. They were currency, the lifeblood of this colossal endeavor. As you might expect, the project also came with its share of skeptics. There must have been a few eye rolls and mutterings of Khufu's folly among the populace. After all, dedicating such vast resources to a single structure could have been seen as the height of vanity or even madness. But Khufu was playing the long game. He wasn't just building for the here and now. He was crafting a legacy, a testament to his reign that would withstand the sands of time. And withstand it did. Despite the logistical hurdles and the labor-intensive processes, the Great Pyramid was completed in about 20 years, record time for an ancient construction project of its size. By the time it was finished, it stood at about 481 feet tall, the tallest man-made structure in the world for nearly 4,000 years. That's like holding the heavyweight championship of architecture until the Middle Ages rolled around with their fancy cathedrals and spires. Pharaoh Khufu's pyramid wasn't just a tomb, it was a statement. It proclaimed the power of his empire, the ingenuity of his people, and a certain audacity to dream beyond the constraints of the era. This was not just a pile of stones, but a symbol of human ambition and resolve. The Great Pyramid of Giza was, and still is, a marvel of engineering, a testament to what happens when human ambition meets sheer determination. And while we might never know every detail of how they did it, what we do know is that the ancient Egyptians didn't just build a monument, they built a legend. As the dust settled on the Great Pyramid's construction, let's zero in on the human engine that powered this colossal endeavor. Forget Hollywood's portrayal of the project as a slave-driven operation. Turns out that's as accurate as a tabloid headline. This wasn't a labor camp. It was more like an ancient job fair where skilled workers and seasonal labourers gathered to earn their keep and a slice of immortality. See, the workforce behind the Great Pyramid was a well-oiled machine of ingenuity and sweat, more akin to community than a chain gang. Picture this: 20,000 to 30,000 labourers, not shackled but incentivized. These were skilled craftsmen, quarry workers and masons, many of whom were part-time labourers taking a break from farming during the Nile's inundation season. That's right. Thanks to the river's reliable flooding, many Egyptians had a few months of downtime, and what better way to spend it than participating in a legacy project that promised food, shelter, and the ancient equivalent of bragging rights. The seasonal workers were like the temp agency hires of the ancient world. They came, they saw, they schlepped limestone, and in return they got a steady diet of bread and beer. That's right, beer. It was safer than water, and a heck of a lot more fun. Plus, it provided the calories needed to haul stones the size of compact cars. The Egyptians didn't just feed them, they offered sustenance that fueled both body and spirit. Let's talk logistics. Feeding thousands of workers meant moving literal tons of food. An estimated 21 cattle and 23 sheep were slaughtered every day to keep these human engines running. That's a meat parade worthy of the most epic barbecue. And let's not forget the grains. Bread wasn't just food, it was currency. The workers' daily rations were carefully calculated to keep them fueled for the back-breaking work of pyramid building. This was a project that took worker welfare pretty seriously, considering it was nearly 4,500 years ago. Housing all these workers wasn't just a matter of pitching a few tents in the desert. This was ancient Egypt's version of company housing, worker villages that were more like bustling cities. Archaeologists have unearthed remains of these settlements, revealing rows of barracks-like dormitories and communal kitchens. Imagine a sprawling complex with streets, bakeries, and breweries. Yes, breweries, because what's a hard day's work without a cold one at the end? These worker villages were strategically placed close to the construction site, minimizing commute times. Talk about a short walk to work. And they came with perks, too. There's evidence of medical care, with skeletons showing signs of healed injuries and surgeries. This indicates a level of care and investment in the workforce that challenges the harsh, faceless image often associated with ancient construction projects. It's like the Egyptians had an early understanding of workforce retention. Keep your workers happy and healthy, and they'll stack stones with the best of them. Economically, this grand project was a stimulus package on a titanic scale. The pyramid was more than just a monument. It was a catalyst for economic activity that saw resources pouring in from across the empire. From the limestone quarries in Tura to the copper mines in Sinai, the demand for materials and manpower rippled through the economy like a stone dropped into the Nile. Participating in the pyramid's construction wasn't just a job, it was an investment in social capital. Workers and their families gained prestige and material benefits. It was a form of upward mobility. Building pyramids was like earning a spot in the Egyptian Hall of Fame. And let's not ignore the divine angle. Working on the pharaoh's tomb was seen as a path to spiritual enlightenment, a chance to curry favor with the gods and secure a prime afterlife real estate. The myth of slaves dragging stones under the whip holds a certain dark allure, but it's about as real as a Hollywood CGI extravaganza. The truth is far more impressive, a testament to human organization and cooperation on a colossal scale. It was a society pulling together to achieve something that screamed human ambition from across the sands of time. As we dig deeper into the workforce dynamics, we uncover a society that understood the value of skilled labor and strategic management. They didn't just build a pyramid, they constructed a community, a thriving hub of economic and social activity that stood as a testament to the power of collective human effort. The Great Pyramid wasn't just a marvel of engineering. It was a monument to the people who carved their lives and labor into its very stones. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries of the Great Pyramid, one limestone block at a time, in our next chapter of ancient Egyptian innovation and enterprise. All right, folks, as we edge closer to understanding the engineering wizardry that went into the Great Pyramid of Giza. Let's take a moment to appreciate just how much of an ancient Rubik's Cube this project really was. We're talking about a time when the most advanced piece of technology was a really sharp stone. Yet, these guys managed to pull off a construction feat that would make modern architects feel like they were building with popsicle sticks. First up on the engineering docket, moving those gargantuan blocks. We're not talking about a quick hop, skip, and a jump. The limestone had to be lugged from quarries as far as 500 miles away in Aswan. Imagine a road trip with no rest stops or Spotify playlists. Just you, a bunch of sweaty workers, and a whole lot of rock. Theories abound on how this Herculean task was accomplished. Some suggest they used wooden sledges to haul the stones across the sand, lubricating the path with water to reduce friction. That's right, a bit of H2O might have been the ancient world's WD-40. Other theories propose elaborate systems of ramps, straight, zigzag, and circular, that would make even the most cunning roller coaster designer pause for thought. The straight ramp theory, while straightforward, would have required a ramp nearly a mile long to achieve the necessary incline, a construction project in itself. The zigzag ramp counters this by suggesting a series of shorter ramps wrapping around the pyramid, like a serpent made of dirt and sweat. Then there's the circular ramp theory, which imagines a spiraling path ascending the pyramid's exterior, like a prehistoric parking garage. Each theory has its merits and pitfalls, but they all point to one undeniable truth. Those ancient Egyptians were playing the world's toughest game of Jenga, with stones instead of wooden blocks and a whole lot more on the line. And speaking of Jenga, the precision with which these blocks were placed would make any Swiss watchmaker weep with envy. The Egyptians weren't just slapping stones together and hoping for the best. They were aligning them with astronomical precision. The Great Pyramid is aligned with the cardinal points of the compass, north, south, east, and west, with an accuracy of up to 0.5 degrees. That's more precise than a laser-guided missile. Legend has it that they achieved this by observing the stars, particularly the North Star, which back then wasn't Polaris, but a star named Thuban in the constellation Draco, who knew that the secret to building the world's most famous pyramid was written in the stars. Now, let's not forget the interior design. Inside the pyramid, the Grand Gallery is a marvel of engineering, a tunnel that rises at a 26-degree angle with stone walls that seem to defy gravity. The precision required to construct such an intricate passageway is mind-boggling, especially when you consider they didn't have the luxury of AutoCAD or even a simple protractor. It's said that this gallery might have functioned as a counterweight system, using massive stones to balance the forces involved in lifting the blocks into place. If true, this would mean the Egyptians invented the counterweight long before it became a staple of medieval architecture. Economically, this brilliance in engineering translated to an investment in resources and manpower on a scale that would make even the most ambitious Wall Street broker blush. The cost of such a feat wasn't measured in gold or silver, but in grain, labor, and human ingenuity. The pyramid project funneled resources across the empire, creating jobs, stimulating trade, and reinforcing the pharaoh's divine status. It was ancient Egypt's version of a New Deal, with the added bonus that it doubled as a gigantic tombstone. The myth of alien architects has its allure, but the reality is far more impressive. The Great Pyramid stands as a testament not to extraterrestrial intervention, but to human ambition and creativity. It symbolizes what happens when you combine an unyielding will with a society that values precision and planning. The Egyptians weren't just building a monument. They were constructing a legacy, one limestone block at a time. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of the Great Pyramid, it becomes clear that this was more than just an architectural achievement. It was a bold statement of human potential and determination, a challenge to the sands of time that still echoes through history. So stay tuned as we delve deeper into the story of this ancient wonder, exploring the techniques and strategies that made it possible. Like a good mystery novel, the best is yet to come. All right, So we've marveled at the engineering marvel that is the Great Pyramid. But let's peel back another layer of this ancient onion and dive into the cultural and religious significance of the structure. Because, spoiler alert, this isn't just a pile of stones. It's an elaborate statement piece in the grand theatre of Egyptian religion and politics. First up, the Great Pyramid as more than a tomb. Think of it as a celestial aeon for the afterlife. This colossal structure was designed to house the pharaoh's body, sure, but more importantly, to secure his journey to the heavens. The Egyptians weren't just about preserving the body. They were obsessed with ensuring the soul, or Ka, had a 5-star experience on its way to join the gods. The pyramid's precise alignment with the cardinal points and its towering height were no architectural accidents. This wasn't just about reaching for the sky. It was about aligning with the cosmos, literally putting the pharaoh on the fast track to eternal life. And let's talk about that divine association. Pharaohs weren't just kings. They were living gods on earth. Khufu, like his predecessors, wasn't content with mere mortal status. He wanted his legacy to shine brighter than a supernova, so he hitched his wagon to the gods. The pyramid wasn't just his eternal resting place. It was his launch pad to divinity, a cosmic elevator to the afterlife. By building such a monumental edifice, Khufu was saying, "I've got connections up there, and here's the proof." Now, this is where the propaganda machine kicks into high gear. The pharaohs were the original spin doctors, masters of ancient PR. Khufu's pyramid was a towering testament to his supposed divine right to rule. It wasn't just about what the structure did, but what it said. It proclaimed Khufu's power and the might of his reign. By erecting a monument that could be seen for miles, he was sending a not-so-subtle message. I'm not just a king. I'm a god among men. And in a world where might often equaled right, that was a critical distinction. The pyramid also served as a tangible reminder of cosmic order, the ancient Egyptians' way of saying, "We've got the universe figured out." The very shape of the pyramid was symbolic, its 4 sides representing the rays of the sun, Ra's rays, to be exact. Ra, the sun god, was the big boss in the Egyptian pantheon, and aligning oneself with him was like getting the ultimate endorsement. The pyramid's design wasn't just aesthetically pleasing. It was a strategic move in the celestial chess game. Let's not forget the economic implications of this religious iconography. The construction of the pyramid wasn't just about spiritual aspirations. It was an economic juggernaut. It required resources from across the empire, limestone from Tura, granite from Aswan, and manpower from every corner of the kingdom. This massive undertaking wasn't just a religious exercise. It was a way to consolidate power, unify the nation, and keep the wheels of the economy turning. The pharaohs knew how to sell a vision, and Khufu's pyramid was the ultimate sales pitch. But here's where the myth-busting kicks in. The romantic notion of a pharaoh as a benevolent god-king overseeing a harmonious society. Well, that's a bit of a stretch. Sure, the pyramid was a symbol of divine order, but it also represented a hierarchical society where power was concentrated at the top. While the pharaoh was busy ensuring his place among the stars, the common folk were toiling away to make it happen. It was divine right with a side of do as I say, not as I do. So, while the pyramid might have been a celestial symbol, it was also a very terrestrial tool of power. It reinforced the social order, with the pharaoh at the pinnacle and everyone else below, quite literally in this case. The grandeur of the pyramid masked the stark reality of a society built on the backs of many for the glory of one. And let's not ignore the creative liberties taken in the name of legacy. The pharaohs were expert storytellers, crafting narratives that would endure through the ages. They were the original myth-makers, ensuring that their stories would be told long after the last stone was set. The Great Pyramid wasn't just a resting place. It was a carefully crafted piece of propaganda, a testament to the power of narrative in shaping history. So, as we continue to unravel the story of the Great Pyramid, remember this. It's not just a tale of stones and stars. It's a story of human ambition, divine aspiration, and a little bit of creative truth-stretching. The Great Pyramid stands as a reminder that history is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we uncover. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this ancient enigma, where every stone has a story to tell, and every shadow hides a secret waiting to be uncovered. Legendary narratives often gloss over the gritty truths, but when it comes to the Great Pyramid, its legacy is a whole different ballgame. So let's dive into the lasting impact of this massive stone monument and how it continues to baffle both historians and engineers alike. The Great Pyramid of Giza is more than just a pile of rocks. It's the ultimate ancient mic drop, a forehead-slapping feat of human ambition that still has us scratching our heads today. Fast forward a few millennia, and here we are with satellites, supercomputers, and smartphones, yet we're still trying to decode the ancient Egyptian playbook. How did they manage such architectural precision without the benefit of modern technology? It's like trying to recreate the Mona Lisa with a box of crayons. We can simulate the construction using fancy algorithms and 3D models. But the truth is, we're still a few hieroglyphics short of a Rosetta Stone when it comes to fully grasping their methods. This is where the Great Pyramid teases us like a cryptic crossword. Just when you think you've got the answer, another clue throws you off. Contemporary engineers and architects are often left in awe, some even inspired, by this ancient wonder. The pyramid wasn't just a tomb. It was a testament to what humans can achieve armed with nothing but rudimentary tools and a colossal amount of determination. The structure's alignment with the cardinal points, as precise as a GPS coordinate, is a nod to the Egyptians' advanced understanding of astronomy. Even today, this alignment is only fractionally off by a mere 4 minutes of a degree. That's more accurate than some modern buildings that have the luxury of laser-guided instruments. Consider the economic and social forces that the pyramid embodied. It was a massive investment in human labor and resource management, effectively the ancient world's equivalent of a government stimulus package. By channeling resources into such a grandiose project, Khufu ensured the machinations of his empire kept turning. This wasn't just about stacking stones. It was about stacking the odds in favor of his legacy. The Great Pyramid was the original build it, and they will come, inviting architects of the future to ponder its mystery and majesty. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was also a testament to the power of ego. Khufu wanted to leave a mark that would echo through eternity, and he succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. The pyramid is as much about human ingenuity as it is about the age-old quest for immortality. If you want a symbol of human ambition, look no further. The pyramid stands as a colossal reminder that humanity has always been driven by the desire to reach beyond its grasp, to build monuments that scream, "I was here." The myth of aliens or supernatural forces constructing the pyramid has its allure. It's a romantic notion, imagining little green men handing over the blueprints. But the reality is far more compelling. An ancient civilization, driven by purpose and an audacious vision, achieved what many today would deem impossible. The mystery doesn't detract from their accomplishment. It enhances it, showcasing the heights of human capability. In the grand theater of history, the Great Pyramid plays a starring role, capturing our imagination and challenging our understanding. It's not just a relic of the past, but an ongoing conversation about what it means to be human. The pyramid is a testament to a society that dared to dream big and had the audacity to see it through, one limestone block at a time. It's a reminder that when humanity is driven by a shared vision, even the sky isn't the limit. So, as we wrap up our exploration of this ancient marvel, take a moment to appreciate its dual legacy. The Great Pyramid is both a wonder of the ancient world and a challenge to the modern one. It stands as a timeless symbol of human ambition, ingenuity, and yes, a touch of ego. It's a stone-cold reminder that sometimes the most profound achievements come from those who dare to dream big and think even bigger. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of the past, let the Great Pyramid remind us that the greatest wonders of all are those that continue to inspire, challenge, and captivate us across the sands of time. Guilds in medieval Europe were the original social networks, but with less scrolling and more scrolls. Forget about those cozy images of craftsmen singing folk songs while whittling away in their workshops. These guilds were more than just medieval LinkedIn. They were the economic backbone of towns, a bit more exclusive than your average country club, with some serious political clout on the side. But where did they come from, and how did they rise to such prominence? Let's rewind to the 11th century to uncover the roots of these powerhouses of productivity. Picture the Roman collegia. No, not a fancy Italian dish, but ancient associations of craftsmen and merchants that laid the groundwork for medieval guilds. These collegia were the Roman Empire's answer to organizing trades and crafts, ensuring that the right people did the right jobs, and occasionally, probably, throwing some epic toga parties. But by the time the empire crumbled faster than a biscuit in a cup of tea, these collegia faded into obscurity, leaving a vacuum that the Dark Ages struggled to fill. Fast forward a few centuries, and the winds of change were blowing through Europe. The 11th century was a period of economic revival. Towns were bustling, trade was expanding, and the population was growing like weeds in a neglected garden. This wasn't just a minor shift, it was a full-blown economic upheaval. There was a need for a more organized approach to trade and craftsmanship. Enter, stage right, the medieval guilds. Small local clubs at first, but with the potential for so much more. These early guilds were the craft equivalent of a startup in a garage. They were modest, local groups of artisans and merchants who banded together to protect their trade secrets and livelihoods. Think of them as the medieval version of a trade union, but with more chainmail and fewer placards. They set standards for quality, price, and training, ensuring that you didn't end up with a dodgy blacksmith who'd send you into battle with a sword that bent like a spatula. But why were these guilds necessary? Well, the economic forces of the time were as turbulent as a medieval soap opera. With trade routes expanding, there was an influx of goods and people. Cities were becoming melting pots of cultures and ideas, but also competition and conflict. Merchants needed to find ways to protect their interests, and artisans needed to ensure their skills remained in demand. Guilds provided a structured solution, a way to regulate competition and maintain quality, while also offering a support network for their members. In this medieval world, guilds began as small fish in a big pond, but they quickly learned to swim with sharks. They evolved from local clubs into powerful entities that could rival today's Fortune 500 companies. By the 12th and 13th centuries, guilds were controlling markets, influencing local politics, and even dictating fashion trends. Imagine a world where your local shoemaker could decide the hemline of your tunic, and you get the idea. But let's not get too carried away on a wave of romanticism. While guilds might sound like the ultimate medieval utopia, they were also exclusive, sometimes brutally so. Membership was often restricted to those who could afford the entrance fees and whose fathers had been members before them. In many ways, they were more about preserving the status quo than fostering innovation. If you were an outsider or trying to break into a new market, guilds could slam the door in your face faster than you could say, artisan cheese. Yet, despite their flaws, guilds were a necessity of the time. They provided stability in an era that desperately needed it, offering a framework for trade and commerce that would last for centuries. They were a response to the economic forces that demanded organization and regulation, ensuring that medieval Europe didn't descend into chaos every time someone wanted to sell a new type of ale. So, as we delve deeper into the evolution of these guilds in our next segments, remember the duality they represented. Bastions of community and innovation on one hand, gatekeepers of tradition and exclusivity on the other. Like any good story, the truth lies somewhere between the legend and the reality, and guilds, with their quirks and contradictions, are no exception. So, speaking of guilds as both community cornerstones and gatekeepers, let's peel back the layers on their inner workings, like a medieval onion with a side of bureaucracy. First up, initiation rites, because nothing screams exclusive club quite like a secret handshake or a cryptic ceremony. These initiation rites weren't just for show. They were serious affairs, sometimes involving symbolic acts or oaths that would make even the most solemn fraternity pledge cringe. We're talking about ceremonies that sealed your bond to the guild, promising not only allegiance, but also that you'd never spill the beans on trade secrets. It was a bit like a medieval version of Fight Club, where the first rule was, you do not talk about the guild outside the guild. Once you were in, the guild didn't just hand you a complimentary mug and a pat on the back. Nope, they had strict codes of conduct that could rival today's corporate handbooks, except these codes had teeth, and not the kind you'd want to mess with. Standards for quality and honesty in trade were non-negotiable. If you decided to cut corners, say by using inferior materials or shortchanging a customer, you could face fines, expulsion, or worse. And the guilds made sure everyone knew their place. The master craftsmen sat at the top of this medieval food chain, followed by journeymen who were skilled but not quite masters, and finally apprentices, who were essentially the medieval equivalent of unpaid interns. The guild halls themselves were the nerve centers of this whole operation. Picture this, a grand hall, often a stone's throw from the town square, where the business of the guild was conducted. Forget any illusions of magical towers filled with wizards and whimsy. These places were more like the medieval version of a boardroom meeting mixed with a country club. They were places where deals were struck, disputes were settled, and occasionally a bit of feasting and revelry was had. Sure, there might be a tapestry or two on the wall, but the real attraction was the decision-making happening behind closed doors. These guild halls were also the epicenter of local influence. They weren't just about craft and trade. They wielded serious political clout. Guild leaders could sway local elections, influence town policies, and sometimes even dictate local economic strategies. Picture a mayor needing the guild's blessing to push through a new market tax, effectively making guilds the medieval lobbyists you never knew you needed. The guilds' ability to set prices and control the quality of goods meant they could stabilize local economies, or, conversely, create monopolies that would make modern antitrust regulators break out in a cold sweat. As early regulators, guilds were the quality control police before the term even existed. They ensured no one was selling a genuine sword that would snap in half at the first clash. But this wasn't just about protecting consumers. It was about maintaining the guild's reputation and power. With power came responsibility, or at least the appearance of it. They impose and enforce rules that could keep a town's economy from looking like a Wild West bazaar with shoddy wares and fly-by-night vendors. The urban landscape was shaped by these guilds, too. In cities like Paris, London, and Florence, guilds were the social glue, binding people together in a web of economic and social networks that were as complex as they were necessary. They provided a sense of stability in a world where change was often as welcome as a rat at a feast. Guilds organized festivals, supported local churches, and even provided charity to the poor, showing a softer side that doesn't often make the history books. Yet the guilds' exclusivity could stifle innovation. New ideas and techniques were often met with suspicion, if not outright hostility. If you wanted to introduce a revolutionary new method of tanning leather or brewing beer, you might find your path blocked by guild members protecting their turf. It's the classic tale of tradition versus progress, where the old guard doesn't take kindly to the new kid on the block. The reality of guild life was a complex mix of camaraderie and competition, tradition and innovation. They were both the architects and the arbiters of their time, shaping not just the economy, but the very fabric of urban life. As we continue to explore the evolution of these fascinating institutions, keep in mind that guilds were as much about maintaining power as they were about craftsmanship. In the next segments, we'll uncover more about how these organizations navigated the changing tides of medieval Europe, balancing the needs of their members with the demands of a rapidly evolving world. Stay tuned, because the story of guilds is far from over, and there's plenty more intrigue and insight to come. Now, as we navigate through the 13th and 14th centuries, guilds were no longer just the neighborhood watch for tradespeople. Oh no, They had leveled up to become the medieval equivalent of corporate behemoths. Think less cozy craft fare and more global conglomerate with a penchant for control. These guilds weren't just pulling the strings behind the scenes. They were the puppet masters of the medieval world, orchestrating a symphony of economic power and political influence that would have made Machiavelli nod in approval. Let's talk numbers, because in the world of guilds, numbers were everything. By the 13th century, guilds had infiltrated nearly every aspect of life in bustling cities like Paris and London. In Paris, there were over 100 different guilds operating by the mid-1300s, each with its own rules, regulations, and of course, dues to be paid. These guilds were more organized than a Marie Kondo fan club, with hierarchies and structures that would make a modern-day bureaucrat weep with envy. The guilds, clout wasn't just about managing the craft and trade. It was about wielding political power like a blacksmith wielding a hammer. Guild masters became key players in local politics, often holding offices within city councils and even swaying elections. It wasn't uncommon for guilds to sponsor candidates who would conveniently push through legislation favorable to their members. Imagine a mayoral candidate backed by the wool merchants' guild in Florence, ensuring that wool tariffs stayed low while silks, imported from afar, were taxed like they were made of gold. This wasn't just economic policy. It was economic warfare, with guilds as the generals. But why stop at politics when you can shape the very landscape of the cities? Urban planning in the medieval era was often influenced, if not dictated, by the guilds. Need a new market square? Better consult the Guild of Butchers and Bakers, because they had a say in how the city's heart would pulse. Entire neighborhoods in cities like London were organized around guild halls, turning them into economic powerhouses that doubled as social hubs. You could almost say guilds were the original urban developers, minus the hard hats and blueprints. Yet with all this influence came resentment. Sure, guilds kept things running smoothly, like a well-oiled medieval machine, but they also had a monopoly on, well, everything. They controlled who could trade, what could be sold, and at what price. If you weren't in the guild, you were out of luck. Ever try selling a loaf of bread without the baker's guild's stamp of approval? You'd be run out of town, faster than you could say sourdough. And let's not forget the myth of the benevolent guild master. Picture a kindly old man who takes care of his guild members like a shepherd with his flock. Now toss that image aside, because the reality was often starkly different. Many guild masters were more akin to medieval CEOs, driven by profit margins and market control. They could impose fines, enforce rules with iron fists, and ensure that any dissent within the ranks was swiftly crushed. It was less about camaraderie and more about maintaining the status quo. This brings us to the economic gatekeeping that guilds were infamous for. Want to start a new trade? Good luck getting past the guild's entrance fees and rigid apprenticeship requirements. These barriers ensured that only the well-connected or those with deep pockets could join the ranks. It was a classic case of pay to play, and many talented artisans found themselves locked out of the market, unable to break through the economic glass ceiling that guilds had carefully constructed. Despite these monopolistic tendencies, the guilds' contributions to society can't be entirely dismissed. They provided a measure of stability in an otherwise chaotic medieval world. By regulating trade and ensuring quality, they kept the market from descending into a free-for-all of snake oil salesmen and counterfeit goods. And yes, they did occasionally support public works and contribute to community welfare, but these acts were often more about maintaining power than altruism. So, as we continue to unravel the complex tapestry of medieval guilds, remember that these organizations were both admired for their contributions and resented for their exclusivity. They were the architects of their own little empires, balancing the scales of power and profit with a deftness that would be the envy of any modern-day mogul. In the next segments, we'll dig deeper into how these guilds navigated the stormy seas of economic change and societal shifts, ensuring their survival and dominance in a rapidly evolving world. Stay with us because the guild's story is far from over. and the next chapters promise even more intrigue and insight. And so we find ourselves at the dawn of the 15th century, where the medieval guilds, once the untouchable titans of trade, began to feel the heat of change, like a blacksmith feeling the first signs of an anvil cracking. The world was shifting, and the guilds, with all their pomp and circumstance, were suddenly not the only game in town. It was a bit like watching a once dominant tech giant falter in the face of new, scrappier startups with fresher ideas and fewer legacy issues. Enter capitalism, stage right, with its insatiable hunger for innovation and profit at all costs. The guilds, first major clash with the forces of change, arrived on the heels of a catastrophic event, the Black Death. This wasn't just any old plague. This was the 14th century equivalent of a nuclear bomb, wiping out an estimated 25 million people in Europe, about a third of the population. Talk about a labor market shake-up. With so many people gone, the survivors found themselves in high demand, and suddenly workers had leverage. As wages rose, guilds struggled to maintain their grip, finding it harder to enforce their old rules and keep apprentices in check when journeymen suddenly had the upper hand. It wasn't just the plague that rattled the guilds' cages. By the 16th century, European economies were expanding faster than a baker's yeast-fueled dough. Capitalism was the new kid on the economic block, and it didn't play by the guilds' rules. The rise of merchant capitalism meant that individual entrepreneurs could bypass the traditional guild system. These merchants were like the Silicon Valley disruptors of their day, willing to break a few eggs or guild regulations to make a profit. Suddenly, trading wasn't just about local markets. It was about international commerce, and ships laden with goods were setting sail for distant shores, bringing back exotic spices and luxuries that guilds couldn't control. Enter the Industrial Revolution, the literal engine of change that would finally turn the tide against the guilds. Imagine factories springing up across the European landscape faster than you could say, textile mill. These weren't your quaint workshops with a few apprentices hammering away under the watchful eye of a master craftsman. No, these were mass-production behemoths, cranking out goods with efficiency and speed that made traditional guild methods look positively quaint. The guilds, bless their medieval hearts, tried to keep up, but it was like trying to win a marathon while wearing chainmail. They were weighed down by their own rules and traditions, unable to adapt quickly enough to the demands of an industrial economy. The master-apprentice model that had served them so well for centuries became a relic, an anachronism in a world that valued speed and volume over craft and skill. Factories didn't need years of training. They needed workers who could follow instructions and operate machines, and they needed them yesterday. As wages in factories began to rise, guilds found it increasingly difficult to attract new blood. Why spend years learning a trade when you could earn a decent wage in a fraction of the time on the factory floor? The allure of the guilds, craftsmanship, couldn't compete with the cold, hard cash of industrial jobs. It was a brutal economic reality, but one that couldn't be ignored. Now, let's talk about the myth of the benevolent guild as a community cornerstone. Sure, guilds had offered stability and support in their heyday, but by the time the Industrial Revolution was in full swing, that image was as outdated as a floppy disk in a world of USB drives. Workers were starting to see through the romantic facade, realizing that guilds were often more concerned with maintaining their own power than protecting their members' livelihoods. The guilds, reluctance to embrace change, became their Achilles heel. This resistance to change paved the way for a new kind of organization, the trade union. As guilds faded, trade unions emerged to fill the void, championing workers' rights in a way guilds never had. Unions weren't about preserving tradition. They were about fighting for fair wages, reasonable hours, and safe working conditions in the new industrial landscape. They picked up where guilds left off, but with a focus on the collective power of the workforce rather than the exclusivity of craft. The guilds' decline was a classic tale of adaptation, or lack thereof. They had thrived in a world of local markets and artisanal craftsmanship, but as the economic landscape shifted, Their reluctance to embrace change sealed their fate. While guilds were busy guarding the gates to their crumbling castles, the world moved on, and the new battleground was the factory floor, not the guild hall. So, as we wrap up this chapter, remember that the story of the guilds is one of both triumph and tragedy. They were the architects of their own demise, unable to see past their own walls and adapt to a changing world. Yet their legacy lives on, not just in the history books, but in the very fabric of modern trade and labor relations. The guilds' rise and fall offer valuable lessons for any organization facing the relentless march of progress. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of this fascinating tapestry, exploring how the echoes of the guilds' past reverberate in today's world of work. And now, fast forward to the modern world, where the echoes of medieval guilds resonate more than you might expect. We're talking about their influence on labor laws, their resurgence in arts and crafts, and even their role in pop culture. For starters, consider the modern labor union. If guilds were the grandparents of worker collectives, unions are their hip grandchildren, wearing leather jackets and rallying for fair wages. The guilds' insistence on quality and protection of trade secrets morphed into unions, focus on fair pay and safe working conditions. It's no coincidence that the labor movement, which gained momentum in the 19th century, borrowed heavily from the guild model, minus the secret oaths and medieval initiation rites, of course. When you think about the arts and crafts movement, especially the one that took hold in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, you're essentially seeing nostalgia for the guilds' emphasis on craftsmanship. Industrialization churned out goods faster than you could say mass production, but with none of the charm. Enter the arts and crafts enthusiasts, craving a return to handmade quality and authenticity. They resurrected the guild spirit, celebrating the artisan over the assembly line worker, with a nod to the past, but eyes on a more aesthetically pleasing future. Now, let's talk about the romanticized view of guilds in popular culture. From video games to fantasy novels, guilds are often depicted as utopian societies of noble craftsmen working in harmony. But let's be real, folks. Those medieval workshops weren't exactly Pinterest perfect. Instead of the idyllic scenes of contented artisans, think more along the lines of competition, economic gatekeeping, and the occasional political maneuver that would make your average politician blush. But who can blame us for wanting to see the past through rose-tinted glasses? It's human nature to romanticize, even if the reality was more Game of Thrones than Great British Bake Off. Let's not forget, though, the indelible mark guilds left on the socio-economic landscape of medieval Europe. They were the architects of order in chaotic times, regulating trade and setting standards when everything else seemed as stable as a medieval bridge in a rainstorm. The urban centers of today owe much to guilds, which laid the foundations for modern cities with their markets and networks. They were the invisible scaffolding that supported the economic structures of the time. But here's where things get spicy. The guilds' reluctance to embrace innovation and inclusivity sowed the seeds of their own undoing. In their quest to control and maintain the status quo, they inadvertently stifled progress. It's a lesson that resonates today: adapt or become obsolete. The echoes of this struggle for balance between tradition and innovation continue to play out in boardrooms, classrooms, and even in tech startups. The story of the guilds is a timeless reminder that power has its pitfalls, and the desire to preserve it can sometimes blind us to the need for change. So, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour of guild history, consider this. The legacy of guilds isn't just a dusty relic of the past, but a living, breathing influence that we see in the modern landscape. From labor laws to artisanal movements, the guilds' fingerprints are everywhere. They taught us about the power of community and the dangers of exclusivity, the importance of quality, and the necessity of adaptation. And maybe, just maybe, they're a reminder that even in a world obsessed with speed and efficiency, there's still room for a little craftsmanship and care. And there you have it, folks, the rise, reign, and ripple effects of medieval guilds. Who knew those ancient networks of artisans and merchants would still be tugging at the strings of today's economic and cultural tapestry? Whether you see them as the original influencers or the gatekeepers of their time, one thing's certain. Their story is as layered and intriguing as the tapestries they once crafted. So next time you see a union rally or admire a handmade chair, tip your hat to the guilds, because their legacy is far from just history. In the wild, untamed expanse of post-Roman Europe, where civilization was still licking its wounds from the empire's dramatic exit, chaos was the name of the game. The Merovingians, a dynasty that sounds more like a medieval rock band than rulers, were in charge. Now, if you think of them as the head honchos, you'd be sorely mistaken. These kings were so busy polishing their long hair, seriously, that was their thing, that they didn't notice the real power slipping out of their hands like a bar of soap in a medieval bathhouse. Let's set the stage. It's the 7th century, and the Frankish kingdom is more fragmented than your grandma's old jigsaw puzzle. The Merovingians might have had the crowns, but it was the mayors of the palace who were calling the shots. These guys were the original power behind the throne, the medieval equivalent of the Wizard of Oz pulling levers behind a curtain. Interestingly, the more you dig into history, the more you realize it's full of these shadow figures who prefer to wield power without the hassle of wearing the crown. Enter the Carolingians, a family with an eye on the prize and a nose for opportunity. At the time, they were like the understudies waiting in the wings, ready to take the stage when the lead actor inevitably flubbed his lines. The Merovingians were dropping the ball, and the Carolingians, well, they were itching to snatch it up like a dog with a new chew toy. Now, if we're talking key players, we can't overlook Charles Martel. This guy didn't just have a name that sounds like a cocktail, he had a reputation to match. Known as the Hammer, Charles was the kind of leader who'd make Thor envious. His most famous gig, the Battle of Tours in 732. And no, this wasn't a medieval tour of Europe with Charles as your guide. This was a showdown that would decide the fate of the continent. Picture this. The Islamic Caliphate, having spread like wildfire across North Africa and into Spain, was eyeing Europe like a juicy steak. The Franks, under the command of Charles Martel, met them near Tours, in what is modern-day France. Now, the numbers are a bit fuzzy, as medieval accounts tend to be, but let's say the Frankish forces were outnumbered. What they lacked in manpower, they made up for in sheer determination and a knack for making the most out of a dire situation. The battle itself was a brutal affair. Think less Game of Thrones and more medieval mosh pit. Charles and his men held their ground against the Islamic forces, and after a day of intense fighting, the Franks emerged victorious. The significance of this battle can't be overstated. It wasn't just a win, it was a statement. By halting the Muslim advance into Western Europe, Charles Martel didn't just defend his homeland. He hammered out the future of a continent that could have looked very different indeed. But let's not get swept away by the romance of it all. The Battle of Tours wasn't some grandiose struggle between good and evil. It was a gritty, bloody clash over territory and power, plain and simple. The reality is that Charles Martel wasn't fighting for Christianity as much as he was fighting for control. Power dynamics, as always, were at play, and Charles was a master of the game. In the aftermath of his victory, Charles consolidated his power, setting the stage for his descendants to push the Merovingians off the throne altogether. This wasn't just a military win, it was a political masterstroke. By the time Charles was done, the Merovingian kings were reduced to figureheads, their power as real as a chocolate sword in a heatwave. As for Charles, he didn't just stop at being a military hero. He was a shrewd politician, using his newfound clout to strengthen his family's position and lay the groundwork for what would eventually become the Carolingian Empire. His legacy wasn't just in battles won, but in the alliances and administrative reforms that would shape Europe for centuries to come. So, there you have it, a time when kings were kings in name only, and the real power players were busy hammering out history behind the scenes. The rise of the Carolingians wasn't just about seizing a throne, it was about reshaping the political landscape of Europe. and all it took was a little nudge from a guy named Charles with a mighty hammer and a vision that would echo through the ages. With the stage set and the Merovingians reduced to ornamental relics of a bygone era, the spotlight now shifts to a man whose name sounds like a punchline at a medieval comedy club: Pepin the Short. But don't be fooled by the diminutive moniker. Pepin's ambitions were anything but small. This guy had a vision that was as grand as his name was misleading, and he was about to pull off one of the most audacious political maneuvers in European history. Now here's the reality check. The Merovingians, like an outdated rock band still trying to ride the wave of their one hit, were clinging to power by the thinnest of threads. Meanwhile, Pepin and the Carolingians were tuning their instruments, ready to headline the political stage. But how do you go from being the man behind the curtain to the man on the throne? Enter the Pope, a political heavyweight in his own right, wielding spiritual authority like a medieval influencer with a direct line to the divine. The year was 751, a time when alliances were forged over shared interests and a good dose of strategic convenience. Pepin, savvy as a fox in a henhouse, saw an opportunity in the Pope's precarious position. Rome was feeling the heat from the Lombards, a group that had all the charm of an uninvited guest at a royal banquet. The Pope needed a protector, and Pepin needed legitimacy. It was a match made in political heaven, or at least the next best thing. Pepin's diplomatic strategy was as slick as a medieval oil spill. He sent a delegation to Pope Zachary with a simple yet potent question. Shouldn't the one who holds the power also wear the crown? The Pope, possibly over a glass of communion wine, decided that yes, indeed, the man with the power should be the king. With that papal nod, the Merovingians were shown the door, and Pepin was crowned king, a move that was as much a coup de theatre as it was a coup d'etat. This coronation wasn't just a change of hats. It was a seismic shift in the political landscape. By securing the Pope's blessing, Pepin wasn't just wearing a crown. He was donning a cloak of divine legitimacy, a nifty trick that would make even the savviest spin doctor envious. This was more than a kingly makeover. It was a rebranding of a dynasty, with the church as both cheerleader and co-conspirator. Of course, there's a delicious irony here. The church, supposedly the bastion of spiritual purity, was deeply embroiled in the murky waters of temporal power politics. And why not? The papacy was a player in the grand game, and aligning with Pepin was a masterstroke of ecclesiastical diplomacy. It was a win-win. Pepin got his crown, and the Pope got a powerful ally. It's a classic case of, you scratch my back, I'll crown yours. But let's not romanticize Pepin as some noble hero stepping into the breach. He was a shrewd operator, with ambitions as sharp as a knight's sword. His reign, which lasted until 768, was marked by military campaigns, not least against those pesky Lombards, who were soon taught the error of their ways. It wasn't just about expanding territory. It was about consolidating power. The Frankish kingdom under Pepin became a well-oiled machine, with the church greasing the wheels. One of Pepin's most impressive feats was laying the groundwork for his son's future empire. Charlemagne, that towering figure of European history, would inherit a kingdom that was not only larger but more cohesive. Pepin's reign was like a medieval boot camp for Charlemagne, complete with political savvy, military might, and a healthy respect for the church's influence. Pepin didn't just pass on a kingdom, he handed over a blueprint for an empire. In the end, Pepin the Short's legacy was anything but. He was a man who understood the power of perception and the art of the possible. By aligning himself with the church, he didn't just seize a throne, he set the stage for a dynasty that would shape the continent. And while his name might elicit a chuckle, his impact was as enduring as a medieval tapestry, intricate, colorful, and woven into the very fabric of European history. As we prepare to delve into Charlemagne's era, let's pause and appreciate Pepin's masterclass in political maneuvering. His story is a reminder that in the Game of Thrones, it's not just about who wears the crown, but who has the cunning to claim it. Stay tuned, because the tale of Charlemagne is about to unfold, and trust me, it's one for the ages. And so, with a crown firmly planted on his head and the blessing of the Pope in his pocket, Pepin the Short left his son Charlemagne a kingdom poised for greatness. Charlemagne, or Charles the Great if you're feeling formal, was the medieval equivalent of a rock star emperor, minus the pyrotechnics, but with plenty of grand tour and impressive conquests. Starting his reign in 768, Charlemagne was poised to put on quite the show. Charlemagne, unlike most medieval rulers, wasn't content to just sit on his throne and let the world pass by. Oh no, this guy was all about action. He expanded his realm like an eager kid with a new set of Legos, piecing together territories across Western and Central Europe. By the time he was done, his empire stretched from the Pyrenees to the Danube, and from the North Sea to the Mediterranean. That's about 1-2 million square kilometers, or roughly 463,000 square miles of medieval real estate, give or take a few moats and castles. Of course, empire building wasn't all sunshine and roses. Charlemagne was as much a benevolent ruler as he was a relentless conqueror, a duality that makes him a fascinating character to study. On one hand, he was the father of Europe, a visionary leader who promoted education and culture like a medieval Steve Jobs. On the other hand, he could be as ruthless as a Game of Thrones villain, subduing rebellious regions with a mix of military might and political cunning. Speaking of education, Charlemagne had a soft spot for learning, despite his own challenges with literacy. He managed to surround himself with some of the brightest minds of the time, guys like Alcuin of York, whom he basically headhunted from England to revamp his educational system. Under Charlemagne's reign, the Carolingian Renaissance kicked off, a cultural and intellectual revival that saw the establishment of schools and the preservation of classical texts. Think of it as a medieval TED talk circuit, with monks furiously scribbling notes in Latin, most of which Charlemagne himself couldn't read fluently. But hey, that's what advisors are for. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the Pope in Rome. In the year 800, Charlemagne found himself in the Eternal City, and what followed was an event that would echo through the ages: his coronation as Emperor of the Romans. Imagine the scene. It's Christmas Day, and Charlemagne is attending Mass at St. Peter's Basilica, minding his own business, when Pope Leo III suddenly crowns him, declaring him Imperator Romanorum. The irony: Charlemagne didn't speak Latin fluently, the official language of the Roman Empire he was now meant to rule. Awkward. Charlemagne's coronation wasn't just a ceremonial hat swap, it was a political masterstroke. By crowning Charlemagne, the Pope wasn't just acknowledging his power, he was also asserting the Church's authority to make or break emperors. This move was as much about religious politics as it was about secular power. The Roman Empire had long since fallen, but the title still carried a whiff of imperial grandeur, like an old perfume bottle that somehow still holds its scent. But let's not get too misty-eyed over this moment. Charlemagne's empire, while impressive, was a patchwork quilt of different cultures and languages, held together by brute force and a common enemy, usually whoever wasn't currently being subdued by Charlemagne's armies. He was a master at playing the political game, using marriages, alliances, and the occasional well-placed siege to maintain control over this sprawling domain. One of Charlemagne's most infamous campaigns was against the Saxons, a pagan group in present-day Germany who seemed to have a knack for rebellion. The Saxon wars dragged on for over 3 decades, with Charlemagne determined to bring these stubborn pagans into the Christian fold, or else. The campaign was brutal, culminating in the massacre of Verdun in 782, where Charlemagne's forces reportedly executed 4,500 Saxons who refused to convert. Not exactly a PR win for the empire, but it did send a clear message: resist and face the consequences. For all his conquests, Charlemagne's legacy wasn't just carved out on the battlefield. He was also a keen administrator, creating a network of counties and duchies that gave his empire a semblance of order. He appointed counts to oversee these regions, ensuring that taxes were collected and laws enforced. Of course, corruption was rampant, and many counts were more interested in lining their pockets than serving the emperor. But still, It was a step towards centralized governance in an age when most rulers couldn't even keep track of their own territories. Economically, Charlemagne's reign was a mixed bag. Trade flourished under his rule, with goods flowing across his empire like a medieval Amazon prime. But the reality was that much of his wealth came from conquest and tribute, rather than sustainable economic growth. The empire may have looked prosperous on the surface, but underneath it was as fragile as a house of cards in a windstorm. Charlemagne's dual legacy as a benevolent ruler and ruthless conqueror has left historians scratching their heads for centuries. Was he a visionary leader ahead of his time, or just another power-hungry monarch with a taste for conquest? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. He was a man of contradictions, a ruler who could be both compassionate and brutal, enlightened and autocratic. As we look back on Charlemagne's reign, it's easy to get swept up in the romance of it all. The grand coronation, the epic battles, the cultural revival, it's the stuff of legends. But let's not forget the harsh realities that lurked beneath the surface. Charlemagne's empire, for all its grandeur, was built on the backs of countless soldiers and subjects, many of whom never saw the benefits of his so-called Renaissance. So, as we prepare to dive deeper into Charlemagne's story, let's keep our eyes open to both the romance and the reality. His reign was a pivotal moment in European history, a time when the seeds of modern Europe were sown in blood and ambition. Stay tuned, because the tale of Charlemagne is far from over, and trust me, there's plenty more to uncover. As we peel back the layers of Charlemagne's story, we're about to uncover a chapter where he swapped his warrior helmet for a thinking cap. Welcome to the Carolingian Renaissance. Picture the Middle Ages as a dimly lit room, with Charlemagne flipping the switch to let in a few rays of intellectual enlightenment. This cultural revival wasn't just about dusting off old Roman scrolls. It was about crafting a new medieval world that could, ideally, spell its own name correctly. Let's dive into the monasteries, the OG think tanks of the Carolingian world. These weren't your typical stone and mortar religious retreats. Nope, they were buzzing centers of knowledge. Imagine the Wi-Fi hubs of the 8th century. But instead of streaming cat videos, monks were copying ancient texts and debating theological nuances. They were the medieval equivalent of Silicon Valley garages, where innovation met isolation. You've got your Benedictines, the Cistercians, and a whole alphabet soup of monastic orders, all scribbling away in their scriptoria like it was a medieval NaNoWriMo. And speaking of writing, let's not forget the unsung hero of this Renaissance, the Carolingian minuscule. Before this nifty font came along, medieval script was about as legible as a doctor's prescription. Enter the minuscule, a script so neat and tidy that it could make your high school calligraphy teacher weep with joy. This standardized script was a game changer, making texts more accessible and, dare I say, less migraine-inducing. It was like the Times New Roman of its day, a font that said, "I'm professional, but I also know how to party." Now, while the monks were busy turning pages into works of art, Charlemagne was setting his sights on education reform. He wasn't content with just a bunch of dusty tomes. He wanted a literate clergy and a learned court. Enter Alcuin of York, Charlemagne's academic MVP. Alcuin was tasked with overhauling the educational system, turning monasteries into schools, and ensuring that Latin didn't become the linguistic equivalent of ancient Sumerian. The curriculum was as broad as a Frankish sword, covering the trivium and quadrivium, grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. In other words, everything you'd need to survive in a world without Google. But let's not get carried away with the romantic image of monks hunched over manuscripts, their halos gleaming in the candlelight. The reality was a bit grittier. These centers of learning were often drafty, with ink freezes in winter and parchment shortages in summer. Plus, while Charlemagne was all about education, his empire was also a tinderbox of constant warfare. The Carolingian Renaissance was a brilliant spotlight on a stage often shrouded in the shadows of conflict. Was this Renaissance a genuine effort to pull Europe out of the intellectual dark ages? Or was it a medieval PR campaign to distract from the endless brawls with Saxons, Avars and Lombards. The truth, as usual, is a bit of both. Charlemagne was a savvy ruler and knew the value of a good story. By championing education and culture, he wasn't just building a legacy. He was crafting an empire that looked as good on parchment as it did on the battlefield. Economically, the empire was a patchwork quilt of varying prosperity. While Charlemagne promoted trade and minted silver coinage like a Frankish Jay-Z, the wealth of the empire often relied on the spoils of war and the subjugation of conquered peoples. The Saxons, for instance, weren't just a thorn in Charlemagne's side. They were also a source of slaves and tribute. The empire's economic engine was fueled as much by conquest as by commerce, a fact that tarnishes the Renaissance's lustrous veneer. And let's not forget the role of the church in all of this. The Carolingian Renaissance was as much about saving souls as it was about saving texts. The church was the empire's partner in this intellectual revival, with bishops and abbots playing pivotal roles in governance and education. It was a symbiotic relationship, with the church providing the moral authority while Charlemagne provided the muscle. The alliance wasn't just holy, it was wholly strategic. But here's the rub. While the Carolingian Renaissance was a beacon of learning, most of the empire's population remained illiterate peasants, more concerned with the next harvest than the next Homeric epic. The Renaissance was largely a top-down affair, benefiting the elite while the common folk toiled in the fields. It was a cultural flowering, yes, but one that bloomed primarily in the cloistered gardens of monasteries and the gilded halls of the elite. Yet, for all its contradictions, the Carolingian Renaissance laid the groundwork for the future. It preserved classical knowledge that might otherwise have been lost, setting the stage for the later, more widely celebrated Renaissance of the 14th century. Charlemagne's vision of a learned empire, though imperfect, was a critical chapter in the story of Europe's intellectual awakening. As we continue to explore Charlemagne's legacy, let's keep in mind that this Renaissance was a complex tapestry woven with both silk and burlap. It was a time of great strides and stark realities, a reminder that even the brightest Renaissances cast long shadows. Stay tuned, because the next chapter is just around the corner, and trust me, the plot only thickens from here. So, just as the Carolingian Renaissance was setting the stage for an intellectual revival, Charlemagne's empire was about to face its most daunting test, the inheritance game. Imagine, if you will, a family soap opera where the stakes aren't just who gets the house in Provence, but who controls a sprawling empire. Welcome to the post-Charlemagne era, where his grandsons turn the empire into a medieval version of Survivor, complete with alliances, betrayals, and the occasional backstabbing. Charlemagne passed away in 814, leaving behind an empire that stretched across a good chunk of Europe. But in a twist that would give even the most seasoned estate lawyers a headache, his empire was divided among his three grandsons like a pie at a family picnic, except everyone wanted the biggest slice. Enter Louis the Pious, Charlemagne's son, who initially took up the emperor's mantle. Louis, a man whose nickname sounds like it was borrowed from a saintly comic book character, faced the unenviable task of holding together his father's grand creation. Louis's reign was anything but peaceful. His sons, Lothar, Louis the German, and Charles the Bald, were not exactly the picture of filial piety. The empire was like a medieval game of risk, with each son eyeing the map for strategic advantage. In an effort to keep the peace, Louis attempted to divide the empire among his sons in a series of partitions, each more complicated than the last. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. By the time Louis shuffled off this mortal coil in 840, the family feud had reached a boiling point. The ensuing civil war was less about grand ideological divides and more about good old-fashioned greed and power. The siblings battled it out until 843, when they finally decided that perhaps constant warfare wasn't the best way to run an empire. Enter the Treaty of Verdun, the medieval equivalent of let's just agree to disagree. The treaty split the Carolingian Empire into three chunks: West Francia for Charles the Bald, East Francia for Louis the German, and a middle kingdom for Lothar, which stretched from the North Sea to Italy like a geographical afterthought. This division was a political band-aid on a wound that would never fully heal. The empire, once a symbol of unity, was now a patchwork of competing interests and rival factions. Economically, the empire was already showing cracks. Charlemagne's grand vision was built on the foundations of conquest, tribute, and a hefty dose of charisma. The new leaders, however, lacked the same gravitas and economic savvy. Trade routes that had flourished under Charlemagne began to suffer as regional leaders bickered and borders fluctuated like the stock market during a recession. The empire's wealth was increasingly tied up in land, not liquid assets, a setup that made it as flexible as a lead balloon. Politically, the Treaty of Verdun was more of a truce than a solution. Each kingdom developed its own distinct identity, with different languages, customs, and laws. It was as if the empire had suddenly discovered its inner teenager, rebelling against any attempt at control. The fragmentation was inevitable. Even Charlemagne, with all his might, was merely holding back the tide. The church, ever the opportunist, found itself caught in the middle of this imperial tug-of-war. Bishops and abbots, who once wielded considerable power, now had to navigate a political landscape as stable as a house of cards. They played a careful game, aligning with whichever ruler seemed most likely to win the next bout of familial fisticuffs. The spiritual unity that Charlemagne had fostered was fraying at the seams, and the church's influence was increasingly regional rather than imperial. And let's not forget the external pressures. Vikings were raiding from the north, Arab forces threatened from the south, and the Magyars were making their presence felt in the east. The empire's military, once a mighty force, was stretched thinner than parchment. Defending the realm was like trying to plug a sieve with a handful of sand. The question of Charlemagne's legacy is a bittersweet one. Was he a unifier, or just the last man standing in a world destined for division? His dream of a united Christendom was noble, but perhaps as realistic as a medieval knight dreaming of a dragon-free Europe. The Carolingian Empire's decline was less a sudden collapse and more a slow unraveling, a reminder that even the grandest dreams can fray when faced with human nature's relentless complexities. In the end, Charlemagne's empire was both a triumph and a cautionary tale. It was a beacon of cultural and intellectual revival, but also a testament to the limits of power and ambition. His grandsons' squabbles over territory were the stuff of medieval drama, but they also underscored the enduring challenges of governance and unity. The Treaty of Verdun didn't just carve up an empire. It laid the groundwork for the nation-states that would follow, shaping the political landscape of Europe for centuries to come. So there you have it, a saga of ambition, power, and the inevitable march of history. The Carolingian Empire was a patchwork quilt stitched together by a visionary ruler, only to be picked apart by the hands of his heirs. It's a tale that reminds us of the delicate balance between unity and division, and the enduring legacy of those who dare to dream big. As the curtain falls on this medieval epic, we're left with a legacy as complex and nuanced as the empire itself, a testament to the grand ambitions and inherent frailties of human endeavor. In the vast, sun-drenched deserts of the 8th century, where the sands were as unforgiving as the political climate, a seismic shift was brewing. It wasn't the kind of change that just slipped by unnoticed, like a camel caravan in the night. Oh no, this was the Abbasid revolution, a transformation that would redefine power and culture in the Islamic world. But before we dive into the mesmerizing chaos of the Abbasid takeover, let's talk about the folks they overthrew, the Umayyads, the rulers with a knack for stirring the pot of public discontent. The Umayyads, reign holders from 661 to 750 AD, were like that one friend who throws a party and then steals all the snacks. Their empire stretched from Spain all the way to the Indus Valley, a whopping 5,000 miles across. But with great power came great responsibility, or in their case, great resentment. Their centralized and Arab-centric policies didn't exactly win them popularity contests beyond their immediate circle. Non-Arab Muslims, or Mawali, found themselves on the short end of the stick, taxed like crazy and treated like second-class citizens. Talk about a raw deal. Enter the Abbasid family, playing the long game with the patience of a cat watching a mouse hole. They claimed descent from Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, an uncle of the Prophet Mohammed, which gave them a bit of street cred in the lineage department. But they weren't just resting on their genealogical laurels. Instead, they were building a secret network that would make any modern spy agency proud. Their main base was in Khorasan, a region that's now split between Iran, Afghanistan, and Turkmenistan. It was the perfect spot, far enough from the Umayyads' watchful eyes, but close enough to strike when the time was right. The Abbasids took the underdog story to a whole new level. They tapped into the dissatisfaction simmering among the Mawali, who were fed up with being treated like the Umayyads' personal ATMs. The Abbasids promised equality and inclusion, which in the political playbook of revolutions is the equivalent of promising free pizza for life. And who doesn't love pizza, or in this case, a shot at equality? Now, let's sprinkle in some 8th century gossip to spice things up. In 747 AD, Abu Muslim, a charismatic Persian leader and the Abbasids' secret weapon, began rallying the disgruntled masses. Picture him as the revolutionary hype man, if you will. And boy, did he deliver. Abu Muslim orchestrated a rebellion that cut through the Umayyad defenses like a hot knife through butter. By 750 AD, the Abbasids had seized control of the Caliphate, and the last Umayyad caliph, Marwan II, met his end in Egypt, which, to be fair, was probably not on his travel itinerary. The Abbasid victory wasn't just a switch in leadership. It was a full-blown cultural and political reset. They moved the capital from Damascus to Baghdad, which wasn't just a change of scenery, but a strategic masterstroke. Baghdad, founded in 762, was like the Silicon Valley of its day, a melting pot of cultures and ideas. Plus, it was situated on the Tigris River, making it a hub for trade that would attract scholars, merchants, and philosophers from all corners of the known world. But let's not romanticize this too much. The Abbasids were as ruthless as they were revolutionary. They held a banquet in 750 AD, inviting the remaining Umayyad leaders under the guise of reconciliation. Instead, it turned into a bloodbath, an 8th century version of Game of Thrones without the dragons. That's one way to ensure job security, I suppose. As the dust settled, the Abbasids set the stage for what would become the Islamic Golden Age, a period of cultural, scientific, and economic prosperity that would light up the medieval world. But the revolution itself, well, that was a tale of political intrigue, cunning strategy, and a bit of old-fashioned betrayal. The Abbasids didn't just topple a dynasty. They flipped the script, reshaping the social and political landscape in ways that would echo through the centuries. So there you have it. The rise of the Abbasids wasn't just a footnote in history. It was a revolution that changed the game. They were the ultimate underdogs, turning dissatisfaction into dominance, and their story was just getting started. And so, with the Abbasids now holding the reins of power, they set their sights on building something monumental, a city that would become the beating heart of their empire. Enter Baghdad, the new kid on the block, founded in 762 AD under the watchful eye of the Caliph Al-Mansur. This wasn't just any city. It was a bold declaration of Abbasid ambition. But let's not pretend this was a fairy tale of architectural whimsy. Building Baghdad was less of an art project and more of an economic marathon, destined to burn through resources like a rock star through hotel rooms. Let's start with the location because, as any real estate agent will tell you, it's all about location, location, location. Baghdad was strategically nestled by the Tigris River, a watery highway that made it the ancient equivalent of prime real estate. The Tigris wasn't just a pretty backdrop for sunset selfies. It was a bustling trade route that linked the Persian Gulf to the heart of Mesopotamia. For the Abbasids, this river was a golden ticket to economic prosperity and a chance to control trade like never before. The river was their cash cow, and they were ready to milk it for all it was worth. But let's not forget the cold, hard cash it took to get this city off the ground. Al-Mansur didn't just snap his fingers and conjure up a metropolis. Building Baghdad was a colossal undertaking, requiring an army of laborers and a mountain of resources. Estimates suggest that the construction cost the Abbasids a cool 4,800,000 silver dirhams, a sum that could buy you a fleet of camels, and then some. These dirhams weren't just pocket change. They represented a massive investment in the future of the Abbasid dynasty. Now, as glorious as this city was destined to be, it wasn't built without a human toll. The laborers who toiled under the blistering sun to erect Baghdad's walls and roads weren't exactly doing it for the love of urban development. They were often conscripted, forced into backbreaking work with little more than a promise of survival. This was no utopia. It was a construction site with all the grit and grime you'd expect from such an ambitious project. Once the city was up and running, though, boy, did it shine. Baghdad quickly became a melting pot of cultures and ideas, drawing scholars, merchants, and adventurers like moths to a flame. It was a place where Greek, Persian, and Indian knowledge collided, sparking an intellectual renaissance that would light up the medieval world. The city was like a giant brain, buzzing with thoughts and theories, a hotspot for the curious and the clever. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of it all. Behind the intellectual glamour, there was a complex web of political and social dynamics at play. The Abbasids were masters of spin, presenting Baghdad as a beacon of inclusivity and enlightenment. Yet beneath the surface, the city was a stage for power plays and intrigue, a place where alliances were forged and broken faster than you could say Caliphate. The economic engine of Baghdad was fueled by trade and taxes, a delicate balance that kept the Abbasid coffers full and the city humming with activity. It was a marketplace of ideas and goods, where silk from China met spices from India and gold from Africa. The Abbasids understood that knowledge was power, and they were committed to making Baghdad the intellectual capital of the world. But while the scholars were busy pondering the mysteries of the universe, the builders were still hard at work, maintaining the city's infrastructure in a constant battle against the elements. The cost of keeping the city running smoothly was high, and the Abbasids spared no expense in their quest to make Baghdad the envy of the known world. In the end, Baghdad was more than just a city. It was a symbol of the Abbasid vision, a testament to their determination to leave a lasting legacy. It was a place where dreams and reality collided, where the grandeur of the Islamic Golden Age was on full display. But as with all great cities, it was also a reminder of the human cost of ambition, of the sweat and sacrifice that lay beneath the surface of its shining facade. And so, the story of Baghdad continues, a tale of triumph and toil, of dreams realized and dreams deferred. As we look ahead, we'll peel back the layers of this remarkable city, uncovering the truths and myths that have shaped its history. But for now, let's leave Baghdad to bask in its newfound glory, a jewel in the Abbasid crown, a city that would shape the course of history in ways both profound and unexpected. As Baghdad basked in its newfound glory, it wasn't just the walls and marketplaces that were buzzing. The real magic was happening in the minds of those who gathered within its confines. Into the House of Wisdom, or Beit al-Hikmah if you want to impress at your next trivia night. Founded in the early 9th century under Caliph al-Mamun, this was less a building and more an intellectual supernova, drawing scholars like moths to a particularly bright philosophical flame. Now, let's debunk a myth right off the bat. The House of Wisdom wasn't some Hogwarts-like school with pointy-hatted scholars casting knowledge spells. It was more of a think tank, a library, and a translation bureau rolled into one, where translating Aristotle was probably the original nerdy side hustle. Picture a bustling hub where Greek, Persian, Indian, and even Chinese texts were painstakingly translated into Arabic. It was like the Rosetta Stone on steroids, where scholars weren't just translating words, but sparking ideas that would illuminate the medieval world. You might wonder why translation was such a big deal. Well, try reading Plato in the original Greek and see how far you get. The Abbasids realized that knowledge was power, not just in the metaphorical sense, but in the very real way it could be used to enhance governance, medicine, astronomy, and more. They were like the ancient world's version of a startup accelerator. But instead of tech entrepreneurs, they had scholars like Hunayn ibn Ishaq, who translated a whopping 116 works of Galen. Talk about dedication to the grind. But the House of Wisdom wasn't just about borrowing brilliance, it was about breeding it. Scholars like Al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra, weren't just crunching numbers. They were laying the groundwork for mathematical concepts that would eventually make your high school math teacher weep with joy. Al-Khwarizmi's work on algorithms, a term derived from his own name, wasn't just about solving equations. It was about solving problems, the kind that would later power everything from computer science to global finance. And let's not forget the astronomical breakthroughs. When you hear names like al-Battani and al-Sufi, think of them as the Neil deGrasse Tysons of their day. Al-Battani refined the solar year more accurately than the Julian calendar, and al-Sufi catalogued stars with a precision that would make a modern-day astronomer blush. Their work wasn't just about stargazing. It was about understanding our place in the cosmos, a cosmic perspective that would influence navigation, timekeeping, and even the way we think about our universe. But why did all this matter? Well, imagine a world where the stars dictated not just your fortune, but your destiny. These astronomical advances paved the way for better navigation techniques, which in turn fueled trade and exploration. In a way, the Abbasids were setting the stage for a globalized world, long before the term was coined. Now, let's talk about one of the unsung heroes of this intellectual boom, paper. Before you roll your eyes at the mundane mention of stationery, consider this. Paper was the medieval internet. Forget about Twitter. Manuscripts were the tweets of the day, spreading ideas faster than you could say caravan. The Abbasids learned the art of paper-making from Chinese prisoners captured at the Battle of Talas in 751 AD, and they ran with it like a kid who just found out how to use a slingshot. Paper revolutionized the way knowledge was disseminated. It was cheaper and easier to produce than parchment or papyrus, making books more accessible to the masses. This wasn't just a technological upgrade, it was a cultural shift. The accessibility of paper meant that ideas could travel beyond the confines of royal courts and scholarly circles, reaching merchants, artisans, and anyone with a thirst for knowledge. It was the democratization of information, centuries before the printing press. But let's not romanticize this too much. While the House of Wisdom was a beacon of enlightenment, it was also a political tool. Al-Mamun wasn't just an intellectual enthusiast. He was a savvy ruler who understood the power of knowledge as propaganda. By promoting scholarship and translating classical works, he was bolstering the Abbasid claim to legitimacy, portraying their rule as a continuation of ancient wisdom. It was a masterstroke of political spin, wrapped in the guise of cultural renaissance. The Abbasids were also adept at leveraging this intellectual capital to strengthen their economy. Advances in mathematics and astronomy had direct applications in trade and commerce, enabling more efficient navigation and calculation of distances. This wasn't just academic, it was about cold, hard cash. The more efficient the trade routes, the fuller the coffers of the Abbasid treasury. And speaking of trade, the bustling markets of Baghdad were a testament to the interconnectedness of the medieval world. Goods from as far away as China and India flowed through the city, along with ideas that would challenge and change prevailing notions. It was a marketplace of both goods and thoughts, where silk and spices were traded alongside philosophies and scientific theories. The Abbasids understood that to rule an empire, you needed more than just a strong army. You needed a thriving economy and a vibrant intellectual life. As the House of Wisdom and the Abbasid scholars propelled the Islamic Golden Age to new heights, the world was beginning to change in ways that would reverberate through history. The intellectual boom wasn't just a cultural footnote. It was a catalyst for transformation, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment that would follow centuries later. And so, as the Abbasids nurtured this era of unparalleled innovation, they were also sowing the seeds of a future that would see the exchange of ideas across continents, the rise of scientific inquiry, and the emergence of a global consciousness. It was a time when the pursuit of knowledge was not just a noble endeavor, but a practical necessity, a means to navigate the complexities of a rapidly changing world. So next time you find yourself grappling with algebra or gazing at the stars, spare a thought for the Abbasid scholars who laid the foundation for so much of our modern understanding. They were the original pioneers, navigating the uncharted territories of the mind in a quest for knowledge that would shape the course of history. But remember, the story's not over yet. We've only just begun to unravel the tapestry of the Islamic Golden Age, and there's plenty more intrigue and insight to come. Stay tuned for the next chapter of this epic tale. As the Abbasids watched their intellectual empire blossom like a desert rose, the seeds of discord were quietly taking root in the cracks of their golden facade. The Caliphate was like a grand opera, each note of triumph accompanied by an ominous undertone. Behind the curtain, the drama of political strife and economic strain began to unfold, a tale more gripping than any scribe could pen. Let's start with the economic Achilles heel of the Abbasid dream. Running an empire isn't a cheap hobby, and the Abbasids soon found themselves stretched thinner than a falafel in a food shortage. Managing a realm that spanned from North Africa to Central Asia was no small feat, and the price tag was hefty. The sheer cost of administration, defense, and infrastructure maintenance was enough to make any treasury official break out in a cold sweat. And if you think balancing your checkbook is tough, try doing it for an empire with a budget deficit the size of the Sahara. The economic strain wasn't just about keeping the lights on in Baghdad. The Abbasid economy was like a Jenga tower, each piece a delicate balance of taxes, trade, and tribute. The caliphs relied heavily on agricultural output to fill their coffers, but as the empire expanded, so did the demand for resources. The over-reliance on land taxes, especially from regions like Egypt and Iraq, meant that any dip in agricultural productivity could send financial shockwaves through the Caliphate. Think of it as a medieval version of putting all your eggs in one basket, except this basket could feed an empire or not. But here's where the plot thickens. The very diversity that once fueled the Abbasid success now threatened to unravel it. The vastness of the empire meant that local governors, or emirs, often acted more like independent rulers than loyal subordinates. This wasn't just a case of rebellious teenagers wanting to stay out past curfew. It was a full-blown political headache. These emirs were supposed to send taxes and troops to Baghdad, but many decided they'd rather keep the goods and go rogue. It was like trying to herd cats if those cats had armies and a penchant for rebellion. Political strife didn't just bubble beneath the surface. It erupted like a volcano. The Abbasid caliphs were no strangers to palace intrigue, and the internal power struggles were as cutthroat as any political thriller. Factionalism was rife, with Persian bureaucrats, Arab military elites, and Turkish slave soldiers, known as Mamluks, all vying for influence. This wasn't just a game of thrones. It was a blood sport, and the stakes were nothing less than control of the Caliphate. The most infamous of these power plays was the rise of the Mamluks, who began as enslaved soldiers but quickly became kingmakers. By the 9th century, they were the muscle behind the throne, and the caliphs were often at their mercy. These Mamluks weren't just brawn, they were a political force to be reckoned with, and their influence was a double-edged sword. While they provided military might, they also undermined the stability of the Abbasid rule, turning the court into a battlefield of competing loyalties. Now, let's debunk the myth of the unending Abbasid Golden Age. While the House of Wisdom and Baghdad's bustling markets painted a picture of perpetual prosperity, the reality was far more complex. The Caliphate's overreach became its downfall, as maintaining control over such a vast territory proved unsustainable. It's like trying to juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle, impressive until it isn't. The cultural and intellectual zenith masked the growing cracks in the empire's foundation. As scholars pennied treatises on philosophy and science, the Caliphate's political structure was quietly crumbling. The romantic notion of a golden age without end gave way to the harsh truth that even the brightest stars eventually fade. The Abbasids' ambition was matched only by their vulnerability, and the empire's decline was as inevitable as the setting sun. But let's not lay all the blame at the feet of economic mismanagement and political intrigue. The Abbasids were also victims of their own success. The very innovations that propelled them to greatness, such as paper and translations, were also tools that empowered regional powers. As knowledge spread, so did the ability for local rulers to govern independently, eroding the central authority that once held the empire together. The decline of the Abbasid Caliphate is a cautionary tale of overreach, a reminder that even the mightiest empires can falter under the weight of their own ambition. It challenges the romantic ideal of an unbroken golden age, revealing the gritty reality of empire management. In the end, the Abbasids were a testament to the complexities of power and the precarious balance of governance. As we leave this chapter of history behind, the story of the Abbasid decline is far from over. It's a narrative of shifting alliances, economic turmoil, and the relentless march of time. The lessons of their rise and fall echo through the ages, offering insights into the nature of power and the eternal struggle for control. And while the Abbasids may have lost their grip on an empire, their legacy lives on in the ideas and innovations that continue to shape our world. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the final act of this epic saga, where the echoes of the past continue to reverberate, offering both warnings and wisdom for the ages. The story of the Abbasids is one of triumph and tragedy, a testament to the enduring allure and ultimate fragility of empire. So, as the Abbasid Caliphate's grandeur crumbled like a stale baklava, let's take a moment to sift through the rubble and see what survived the fall. Spoiler alert, it's much more than just dusty manuscripts and half-remembered tales of glory. As the political structure of the Abbasid Empire slowly disintegrated, its cultural and scientific contributions took on a life of their own, echoing through the ages like a catchy tune you just can't shake. First off, let's talk about the intellectual legacy. The Abbasids didn't just collect knowledge like some people collect stamps. They curated it, expanded it, and gave it a new home. The House of Wisdom may have been the crown jewel, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. The translation movement, initiated by the Abbasids, was akin to opening the floodgates of classical knowledge, unleashing a torrent of Greek, Persian, and Indian wisdom into the Arab-speaking world. This wasn't just about translating Aristotle's musings on metaphysics so they could collect dust on a shelf. No, this was about synthesizing and building upon these ideas, creating a vibrant intellectual tapestry that would later influence scholars in Europe. Ever wonder why your high school math teacher was so obsessed with algebra? You can thank Al-Khwarizmi, whose works laid the foundation for the subject. The Abbasids were the original crowdsourcers, gathering the best minds regardless of their origin. This cosmopolitan approach to knowledge meant that even as their political power waned, their intellectual influence only grew stronger. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, these texts, painstakingly preserved and expanded upon by Islamic scholars, would find their way back to Europe, sparking a whole new era of intellectual awakening. So next time you're cursing calculus, remember that it was part of the Abbasid gift to the world. Now, let's shift gears to something a bit more tangible, the innovations in science and technology. The Abbasids weren't just armchair philosophers, they were practical thinkers too. The advances in astronomy weren't merely about gazing wistfully at the stars. They had real-world applications, like improving navigation and timekeeping. These guys were the original GPS developers, mapping the heavens to better understand our place on Earth. The astrolabe, perfected during this time, was the medieval equivalent of a Swiss army knife, used for everything from finding the direction of Mecca to measuring the altitude of a mountain. And let's not forget the medical advancements. While medieval Europe was busy bleeding patients to balance their humors, Abbasid physicians like Al-Razi were writing comprehensive medical encyclopedias and conducting experiments to understand diseases. Al-Razi's Kitab al-Hawi, a multi-volume medical compendium, was like the WebMD of its day, minus the hypochondria. These medical texts would eventually make their way to Europe, laying the groundwork for modern medicine. So, the next time you pop an aspirin, give a nod to the Abbasid scholars who helped pave the way for medical science. But wait, there's more. The Abbasid Caliphate also left a lasting imprint on art and architecture. Their love for intricate geometric patterns and arabesques wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a reflection of their philosophical and mathematical prowess. These designs, which adorn everything from mosques to manuscripts, are a testament to the Abbasids' ability to blend beauty with complexity. The architectural innovations, like the iconic pointed arch, would later be picked up by European builders, paving the way for Gothic cathedrals. So, in a way, the soaring spires of Notre Dame owe a tip of the hat to the Abbasid architects who pioneered these techniques. Now, as we wade through the myths versus the realities, it's crucial to recognize why this period continues to captivate us. The romantic image of the Islamic Golden Age, with its bustling bazaars and scholarly debates, is undeniably alluring. But let's not ignore the grit beneath the glitter. The Abbasids were adept at political maneuvering, using their cultural renaissance as a tool to legitimize their rule. The story of an unending golden age is a myth that glosses over the political strife and economic challenges that plagued the Caliphate. Yet, it's precisely this juxtaposition of high culture coexisting with political instability that makes the Abbasid era so intriguing. It's a reminder that human progress is often messy, full of contradictions and complexities. So, what's the take-home message here? The Abbasid Caliphate may have faded into history, but its legacy is far from forgotten. Its contributions continue to shape our world, from the mathematical equations we use to the medical principles that keep us healthy. The Abbasids remind us that knowledge is a currency that never devalues, a treasure that transcends the rise and fall of empires. In the grand tapestry of history, the Abbasids stand out as a vivid thread, weaving together cultures and ideas into a rich, enduring legacy. And as we wrap up this epic tale, let's take a moment to appreciate the Abbasids for what they were. Visionaries who dared to dream big, to reach across cultures and time, leaving a mark that still resonates today. Whether you're solving a tricky equation, marveling at a starry sky, or admiring the intricate beauty of Islamic art, know that the echoes of the Abbasid Golden Age are still with us, whispering the timeless tale of human curiosity and ingenuity. So here's to the Abbasids, the underdogs who rose to greatness and whose influence will forever be etched in the annals of history.